Wagwan, testing. Okay, let's see. It is 10:05 in the United Kingdom, and just let me know, people, if you can hear me. Press one in the chat if you can hear me. It's your boy Trill Black, back after a long hiatus. At least from lives, anyway. Let me know if I'm coming through loud and clear, people. We're just gonna wait a few minutes and wait for my guests to get set up properly. I want to know that my voice is coming through loud and clear. So just press one if you can hear me loud and clear. Oh, thank you, Khalid. Khalid says yes, he can hear me loud and clear. Tr or TR says one. Thank you for that. Ian Chaldean, that's a familiar face. Thank you for being there. Ian Chaldean says one. Thank you very much. Okay, that's good. That's good. I believe it's 5 p.m. in America right now, Eastern time. What would that be Pacific time? I don't know. Oh, heavyweights in the building. King's Monologue says one. Christian EK says one as well. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. It's good to see you in the chat, King. It's been a while. I know you're working on that book. The big one. That's why that's why I can imagine it's been keeping you off these streets lately. Other than that, maybe you're just taking a break. You deserve it. Well and truly deserve it. All right, that's good. That's good. I'm gonna come clean. Okay, I put out a post. Let me see if I can. You guys have seen the post, haven't you? And I said, I will be chatting with. We'll be going through. It was quite short, cryptic almost, but I'll be sharing, doing a deep dive into ancient Egyptian genetics, and I tagged Camgiverse in that, but I did not tag the Dr. Cater. I don't even know if he's got a YouTube account per se, or yeah, I don't know if he's got anything of that sort. But I realized afterwards, oh my goodness, this is getting quite a lot of interaction. I hope people don't think I've got the doctor on. So let me just come clean quickly right now. I do not have Professor Cater himself in the flesh. I think that would make, I'm not prepared to have um someone I'm just, the way I feel right now, I'm not on that level when it comes to this kind of a conversation. If he was to come on, he would just literally take the floor and I would just be listening. I might as well be on the other side of this laptop right now if he was to come on. So, but what happened was, actually I came across, I'm kind of working my way slowly through the genetic side of things. Um, and I know that quite a lot of my listeners are um, into debunking their debunking through genetics. I can't remember the guy's name now. He's got a brother. If you're here listening, or if you come on later, anyway, if you're here now, let me know. He has this Negrito display picture, and he knows so much. He's always coming on whenever I do anything that touches on genetics in the least. He's always coming on to add some extra information. If he wants to jump in tonight, he can jump in, definitely. I'll send you the link and you can come in. This is going to be a steep learning curve for me, and I suspect for some of you listening right now. I've got Camgiverse standing by, waiting, and a lot of you don't know who he is. Well, actually, no, I say, no, what am I saying? A lot of you know who he is, and for the few of you that might possibly don't know who he is. Um, he is the granddaddy of um, Black/African history in these YouTube streets. I was watching his stuff before I started my channel, and he's an out and out academic when it comes to this. Really, but one of those academics with a pizzazz to him. You know, he's not he's not a stuffy, suity sort of academic. He will slap you around if he needs to. Definitely slap you around if he needs to. Um, um, so he's going to be here with us, and he's going to be breaking down this video of Professor Shamaka Keita, who is a medical doctor, I believe, by training. But so Professor Keita, if you don't know again about him, kind of took a uh, deviation and kind of digressed for a while. I don't know that he's on it as hot as he was a couple of years ago, but he took a digression from the medical stuff into the field of Egyptology just to put some myths aright. And one of them being this genetic myth. You know, this I think one of his main forays into this topic was in 2018 when this guy came out to debunk the fake study. Was it 2018? Correct me in the chat, guys. Let me know if I got that wrong. 2018, this fake study that came out, this Schunemann so-called study that came out to say that the ancient Egyptians were more related with the people of the Levant or the Middle East. They're always trying to do that. For some reason, they're always trying to do that. So let me set the floor this way, and then we'll go in and we'll get Kamji on. Thank you. King's Monologue says 2017. His response was 2018. So the Schunemann paper came out in 2017, and the response of Shamaka Keita and co. Gordine and I think his brother, another Gordine, came out in 2018. Okay, so the floor is this, okay, and you're gonna hear Shamaka Keita talk about some of this in this video that I was watching recently. It's for the longest we've had evidence from historical sources. Yada yada yada, saying that these Egyptians, we Greeks, we've come along and we've seen them, and we we know what they look like. They're black. Quotes. Now I'm quoting, too black. Aristotle says he groups them with the Ethiopians. We've had Roman travelers say the men of Egypt are generally black and brown. So that maybe 2,000 years later, 2,000 plus years later, if anyone wants to reproduce them on something called film, just know we saw them. They're black to brown. There should be no Elizabeth Taylor. There should be no Charlton Hestons, no Yul Bryners. Shout out to Ten Commandments. There should be none of that. We saw them. They're black and brown. They said about how I've shown you quotes. One of my first videos on this channel was quote after quote talking about this Egyptian with thick lips, this brazen Egyptian youth with thick lips and spindle shanks, basically thin calves. Same kind of thing you get along the Horn. Somalis, Ethiopians, Kenyans, Maasai, black people generally were known for that. Anyway, they saw them, they described them, but that hasn't stopped what has ensued. And then you have the anthropological evidence. You had these, for want of a better word, because it really doesn't do it justice, racists come along and measure the skulls. And the skulls were saying exactly what they weren't expecting them to say, which was you got people whose skulls clustered with populations today that we'll call African and black and Negroid. So that's not really what they want to hear. So there's a big debate about that. They long that out. Just like they long out the debate on quotes, black doesn't mean black anymore, as the ancient Greeks say, it means dark skin. So then they start to go back and forth on the anthropological data as well. We have cultural analyses. Lots of things culturally point to ancient Egyptians coming from an African population, black population, lots and lots of things. Till today, they're still finding, we can't plumb the depths. Shout out to my brother King's Monologue, who's in here. He's done lots of amazing videos on the Ankh, cattle, iconography, um, all manner of cultural linkages. Okay. In fact, it's embarrassing. The cultural link with the rest of Africa is quite embarrassing. The late Christopher Ehret was a heavyweight in this area, and he was unequivocal about the cultural links with the rest of Africa, wider Africa, not with Middle Eastern. They had their own thing going on, and shout out to them. But the two are very different. Some of you don't like it, but I don't really care. You respect me, I respect you. I'm a Christian, and I remember reading the Bible not long ago, and I was pleased to discover that even the Bible was on my side. When the Bible talks about the ancient Egyptians quite a lot in the prophets, in the prophetic books, it groups them with the Ethiopians. Doesn't group them with anyone else, doesn't group them with the Eastern Crescent or Fertile Crescent, whatever. It talks about them in league with the Ethiopians. In fact, there are quotes in the Bible where it talks about Egypt having its hope in Ethiopia. Because as we find in the cultural analyses and the anthropological data, whenever Egypt needed help, whenever Egypt needed to regroup, it found its regrouping in, look down there, where we're not supposed to have any links to because of the so-called Sahara that blocks us. Oh, with the Kushites. And so the Bible confirms that thousands and thousands of years ago. It also says in a passage in Ezekiel, talks about how, I think it's Ezekiel, might be Isaiah, talks about how the Egyptians will be returned to their place of origin. And the phrase that's used there is sometimes translated as Cush, the place of origin being Cush. Oh, wouldn't you know? That's interesting. Anyway, we've had this for years and years. We've had lots of attempts to problematize what's obvious. No, there's some diversity of skin color in the paintings. Skin color that's really just different shades of African people, skin color, brown to black. And now recently, the battlefront is with genetics. Now, I've kind of missed the trick with this, in the sense that I wanted to ignore it totally because I'm tired of running around dancing on. Once I started looking into this, and I realized the name of the game is just to keep punting and keep obfuscating and keep confusing the issue. It's like playing with kids. Once I realized, the name of the game is actually just white supremacy and white insecurity. Let's call a spade a spade. Once I realized that, I realized, okay, this isn't a case of this isn't a game that's set up. This isn't a game this isn't even a game. This is just a rigged thing that's meant to confirm um one group's fake story and keep another group down with a fake narrative. So I said, you know what? I'm not even going to go into genetics. We have enough evidence. It sounds like they're using genetics to kind of as a field that they have a monopoly over. They're using that to manipulate the issue. So that's what I did for the longest. But guys, you can't when they bring when they bring a knife, you have to bring a gun. Pardon the expression. No, lots of people are very testy out there right now. So, but it's just a phrase, just a metaphor. So no one freak out. When they bring a gun, you have to bring a gun, and if they bring a revolver, you got to bring an AK. And if they bring an AK, my American brothers and sisters, you need to help me out. you know, so you need to bring a bazooka. So we can't leave the genetic thing aside. I'm realizing that now, because that's what they're using. That's what, it doesn't matter all the stuff that disprove their theory about a white or Middle Eastern Egypt. This is their new silver bullet. We've got to face them on that front. To that end, I started taking an interest very recently, and my interest has led me down watching different videos on YouTube, and also reading these articles. Found my way to the Schunemann study eventually. Then this 2025 paper came out, and this is what they're using recently. The 2018 paper has been debunked It's embarrassing how sorry, the 2017 Schunemann paper has been debunked ridiculously. I mean, King's monologue, who's here, has absolutely destroyed this paper. I've done my bit on my channel, but even before me, we had Kweli Mika's channel do a complete destruction of that paper, but they don't rest. So 8 years later, we have this 2025 New Iraq paper, which I did a video on. But even me, with my very, very, very limited knowledge on this issue, I come to this as a historian, as a reader of text, historical texts. I come from a background of humanities. I'm trained in the humanities. I'm trained in legal papers. I'm trained in studying, um, in studying what people write and what people say, and translating stuff and whatnot. Um, but even me, with my limited scientific knowledge of genetics, I could read the 2025 paper and see massive red flags. You read that paper, and from the very beginning, there's massive question marks. We'll get into that later on, but there's enough of us in the chat now to get going. Let me introduce Kamji, and then Kamji can say a few things, and then I'll play this video. I don't know what Kamji wants to say. I tend to keep these things nice and fresh. I don't talk to my guests beforehand, so that it's nice and um, juicy. I don't know what the person is going to say. I don't know what the response to my questions are going to be. So I haven't really spoken to Kamji at all, save for a few seconds before I click the live button. So Kamji is going to come on, say or not say anything, and then we'll play this video by Professor Shamaka Keita, in which he dissects very well, I think, and very concisely, the tricks, and he does it quite diplomatically, the tricks that are being used, that are being played on us by these, again, I'm going to call a spade, by these white supremacists when it comes to these genetics papers and these studies that are coming out recently. All right, Kamji, I hope you're ready. I'm adding you to stage now, brother.
It's good, everybody in the chat. Um, this is definitely an important discussion because, I've always stated on my channel that, genetics is probably the weakest field of anthropology. It's the field that, is easiest to spread manipulation and propaganda. And, Dr. Vanessa Davies, who is an Egyptologist and nubiologist, white female Egyptologist and nubiologist, she actually speaks about the genetic version of the invading pharaonic race theory, right? So she speaks about William Flinders Petrie and and the fact that and the fact that a lot of these geneticists, they're basically trying to reinvigorate the idea that Western Asiatics or Caucasians from Asia, these pastoralists migrated into the African continent and are the reason that Africans have civilization. And you see this when they try to promote, these different categories from Africanist, the Hegelian distinction between Saharan Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, which Dr. Shamar Takeda, as a biological anthropologist, actually formulated infra and supra-Saharan African to speak about the variation that happened both before, during, and after the African human period, right? And he's going to get into some of the specifics. But this is a field that, more, Black people around the world should have confidence in, not only because of the racist manipulation that is occurring within it, but mainly because it's not that difficult. And a lot of times these academics, they try to make barriers of entry to make it so that the average person doesn't have access to these spaces. But with my channel and channels like yours, we want to make it more easy for the average everyday brother and sister to be able to have contact with this information and to be able to divulge the truth in whatever space they occupy. So, I appreciate you for having me on, and let's get forward into the video.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I want to just quickly remark upon that. What this I've never thought about it this way before, ever, Kamji. Um, it is actually a reintroduction of the Hamitic thesis. That's what this is. When you strip it down to its bare bones,
Absolutely.
this whole idea that we need to look to the Levant. It's just a rebirth of the Hamitic thesis. So that nothing changes; they just regroup and um, oh wow, it's incredible. That's my mind's blown just by that. Just by what you said there. All right, I'm gonna present this video. It's a few years old, but still very relevant. Let's go. There we go.
Tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
So, Kamji, just stop. Let me know when you want me to stop anytime. I'll hit pause and you can comment, and I'll do the same. While I've got the
course.
controls there. So,
I would like to let's give a hand to Sally Ann Ashton and Syra Law and Steve Quirk for hosting these. I think it's very important. I think it's considering that they're members of the Academy in a particular way. They're standard academics. The fact that they have opened their eyes and ears and hearts to having wider discussions sets them apart. So they're special people. I also want to recognize Dr. Paulo Farias, who is from Brazil, sitting right here. He is an Africanist historian. He works on Islamic West African history. He was trained as a doctor, medical doctor first, but he's written beautiful books on, for example, Arabic inscriptions on tombs from Timbuktu and Janneh. He's a treasure. He's right here. He's at the University of Birmingham. He surprised me by coming today. He's a friend, an email friend, but now a personal friend. And so I think he's somebody that we all should get to know better and to speak with. Okay? All right, the biocultural origins of Egypt. Biocultural is a term that's used by many people in anthropology today to refer to synthesizing information about populations, about peoples, about communities. Biology by itself won't give you the answer. Culture won't give you the answer in many situations. Language won't give you the answer totally. The lines of evidence, though, should not be assumed to run together, to be necessarily collected, because we can speak, we can learn to speak different languages no matter who we are. We have Dr. Okamura here, who's a Brazilian also, but I think she's of Japanese origin, is that right? So here we go. And needless to say, we know that we have different ways to put things together. However, we can look at different parallel lines of evidence or different lines of evidence to see if they run parallel. That's what I mean to say. And that's what we're going to do with Egypt. Origins of early Egypt, in sort of everyday terms. People want Asian, European, or African. These are very big.
want me to pause?
Yeah. I think what he's saying here is very, very important because he's speaking about a pluridisciplinary team. And he mentioned, I think he mentioned 3 separate times the involvement of Brazilian scholars, particularly Afro-Brazilian scholars, who they'll have a lot of data in Portuguese dealing with some of the Central African kingdoms, like, the Congo Kingdom, You know, maybe some of them may deal with, you know, Great Zimbabwe and Manamatapa, you know, in the Maputo Empire over by Mozambique. It's important for us, especially in the Anglosphere, to not necessarily get so caught up on English sources and to be able to use the diversity of sources in different languages and collaborate with different Black scholars around the world. That way, we have a completely comprehensive understanding that's not limited by the Western propaganda within the countries that we live in. So I just wanted to point that out because that's a very, very important point to bring up with respect to research.
Ditto, ditto. Some of the best stuff I've come across accidentally has been non stuff I've had to translate from French, Portuguese. Yeah, definitely ditto that.
Terms which in themselves are might have problems. And when we talk about origins, we can talk about things long ago or more recent origins. And what do we mean? Well, we're talking about ancient Egypt. When we say origins, are we talking about the origins of the Egyptian state? You know, when they developed kings and a recognizable Egypt? Or are we talking about its more distant roots, where we can't identify anything that's necessarily Egyptian in the sense of the whole complex, the whole unit, but elements that surely went into it? And what does origins mean? Are we talking about geography, language, culture, biological genealogy, or, in big quotes, this notion of race? And if I have a moment later on, I will talk about the issues with the problems with the concept of race. And for me, let me just say this. Modern human beings do not structure into races. We use this word race very loosely and incorrectly. It has a technical meaning, and I insist on its technical meaning. I insist on that. And we'll talk about it later. We want to explore objective criteria. And when we talk about geography, as I mentioned earlier, you can talk about physical geography, the location of a place, culture geography. We already talked about this. You know, Egypt is the gift of the Nile. And here we have a cross-section of the Nile Valley. We have the river here. And let me see if I can get this in focus. We have the floodplain. This is where most of Egyptian life took place, just up here and near the floodplain, because this is where food came from. And we have the low terraces in the desert. This is sort of the topography, a slice through.
I just want to pause there because I want to make it's starting to get a good few amount of people in the chat now. And for you just joining us, we're with Camgiverse. If you're not subscribed to Camgiverse's channel, you need to ASAP. I can't really keep up. He will always post good stuff, and but his channel is a constant source of knowledge on just our history, Black people's history. He hits all different angles. So I'm with Camgiverse tonight. We're discussing this talk by Professor Keita. But what I like about Professor Keita here is that in this talk is he's being subtle. I think this is a Cambridge University talk, and you kind of know, if you know, you know. He's being subtle. And one of the examples of him being subtle here is he talks about the Nile civilization and how Egypt is a child of the Nile. And guys, I'm gonna ask. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this. But which way do civilizations along a river tend to move from? They move. Don't know if anyone's gonna answer that. Don't really care. I'm just gonna go and answer it myself anyway. But you can
The
guess
audience
where I'm
or
going with it.
me?
Sorry, say that again.
Is that a question for the audience or me?
It's a question for the audience, but I'm gonna answer it anyway. Do you want to answer it?
No, you can answer it.
I mean, it flows. Civilizations build downriver. They go downriver, and
Yeah.
the Nile, downriver for the Nile would be from the south. Am I right on that, Kamchi?
100%.
Right. And this is, I mean, he doesn't want to hit that. He doesn't want to whack that nail on the head. He doesn't want to kind of over egg the point there. But he's hoping he's talking to an intelligent audience. But the problem here isn't that a lot of the time the problem isn't that we're talking to a dim audience or a non-intelligent audience. The problem is that we tend to be talking to people with cognitive dissonance. Okay, if civilizations for the most part build downriver, that would mean clustering with all of us evidences that we've come across, the civilization that we call ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, built from the south downriver into the north. It came from within Africa. It didn't come from some strange race of people we can't really place, from the Fertile Crescent, quote unquote. It came from in Africa. And he's just dropped that in there, hoping that he doesn't really have to say much more than that. But and you're gonna see this more and more in this talk. He's playing very and some people, I watched the video, and in the comments I saw some people kind of lambasting him for not kind of going too far or far enough. I can imagine there's a brother in the audience, actually. I don't want to spoil it, but I will spoil it with this regards to this. There's a brother in the audience that in the question and answer section, he's trying to push Gator, and it's like, you don't have to push the guy. He said what he said. You kind of have to read the room. He said what he said within the context of the people he's speaking to, and you're there with your dashiki and your thing. I get that, brother. But this guy is trying to he's trying to disrupt the flow in a more subtle way, and you have to be in tune with that to kind of get what he's doing. I just thought that's worth saying. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. If you don't, I'll just play.
No, that was
the Nile
perfect.
Valley. And like I said earlier, we have the issue of understanding how the environment was used to create the culture, or what elements from the environment comment on the origins of the culture. There is no evidence that something called the Egyptian community or Egyptian culture was created in Syria, and that a whole community of people came to the Nile Valley. Do things like that happen? Sure they do. The Pilgrims came to America, and they came with notions of, Protestantism, Magna Carta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Clearly formed in England. They didn't like the king, but everything else they brought. They brought British culture to the New World. Here we have a language map of Africa. Language is also a part of culture. It's part of this origins questions. The top part of the map with the vertical crosshatches and the different lines represent the Afro-Asiatic language family. This is not all of the families now. There's some new families and some new members of the family. This is an old slide. Omotic, which is spoken only in southern Ethiopia, down in here. And there's another language, it's a dead language called Ongata, spoken only by less than 10 people now, which is also felt to be a member of Afro-Asiatic. All right. This obviously doesn't have ancient Egyptian on it, because the reason we have Semitic in North Africa across what I call super-Saharan Africa is because of, during the Islamic period, Arabic was adopted by people. And in some cases, you had groups of Arabs who actually came into North Africa, such as the Hilalian invasion in the 11th century. No, in the 12th century. Oh, and the other language families of interest in this area would be the Nilo-Saharan language family. Modern Nubians speak Nilo-Saharan. You find Nilo-Saharan languages spoken in Ethiopia. Across the belt through Darfur, the Fur language itself is Nilo-Saharan. And you have Nilo-Saharan speakers along the...
Go on, Kamji.
Yeah, this is a conversation, that me and Dr. Keita have had behind the scenes, more so, because right here he's presenting the Africanist perspective, from Newman and Shu, even going back to Joseph Greenberg. And, their perspective is different than the historical linguistic perspective. And it gets into like technical terms like phylum, right? A phylum within historical linguistics is more of a tentative grouping, a grouping that hasn't been completely validated, but the scholars believe it to be true. Whereas a family, a family would be something like Indo-European. That's something with virtually universally accepted protoforms, or a protoform would be an ancestor, an ancestor on the grammatic level and the different, structural levels of the language. Indo-European has virtually universally accepted protoforms, and that would be the example of a family. So when you're studying African languages, it's important to be aware of the distinctions between Africanist. And when I say Africanist, I'm referring to the Western, typically of, European descent, experts on African culture and language. This would be your Lefkowitz, Greenberg, your Kevin McDonald, your Chris Eretz, your Russell Shue, Moosin, your Cone Bowstone, who studied Bantu. These would be Africanists, and they're not the same as like a Pan-Africanist like John Henry Clarke. I use the distinction between Lefkowitz and John Henry Clarke to describe the difference between an Africanist and a Pan-Africanist. So when he's talking about these language families, he's referring to the Africanist field, and he's dealing with working hypotheses that various linguists use. And these are things that are subject to testing, right? These aren't things like Mande. Scholars don't know necessarily, or they haven't determined how Mande fits into Niger-Congo, even though most Africanists believe that it does, right? And on and on and on. Afroasiatic is a little bit deeper, because once we get into the NURAD study, I'm going to show you why that's controversial, and why even the existence of Afroasiatic, though it is an area of diffusion or contact, it kind of messes them up, because most of the branches are in Africa. And if you're dealing with an Afroasiatic person, Proto-Afroasiatic person migrating to the Levant, they would have definitely been Black. So it kind of screws them up on that end. But it's just important to be aware of the distinctions, and just know that Africanist linguistics is not the same as historical comparative linguistics. That's it.
Great, thank you.
End of the Niger River, as well as in East Africa. The Songhai in West Africa speak Nilo-Saharan language. They're almost an isolate. They're kind of here by themselves. Another interesting story in deep time African history. And people like the Maasai and the Southern Sudanese also speak the Nilo-Saharan languages. Okay. Ancient Egypt, Old and New, spoken Afro-Asiatic language, ancient Egyptian, sometimes called Afrosan by Chris Eretz, or Afrasian by the Russians, by Dakanov. Nubian, Nilo-Saharan. In the Sahara, we have both Afro-Asiatic and Nilo-Saharan languages, and in the Sudan today, we have both languages spoken as well. This is one notion of how these languages may be connected genealogically. This is Roger Blench, who actually lives right here in Cambridge. This is a tree that he published. In this, he has Semitic languages spoken in the Near East splitting off early. He suggested there may be an Eritreic group, that Egyptian Berber Chadic, spoken around Lake Chad and northern Nigeria, but also in other parts of the Sahara. Beja, spoken in the Sudan and Egypt even today, and Cushitic languages. And this gets revised often. Here you have a picture from the great Russian linguist Diakonov, Igor Diakonov, who died a few years ago. This is from his book, Afrasian Languages, published in 1965. He has the family of Afroasiatic originating near the Horn of Africa, either in the Southern Sahara, the Sudan, or some people say in Ethiopia proper. He has a Semitic branch going in across the Red Sea into Arabia. Other people have it going in through the north. Again, historical linguistics is a very interesting field that's still under development.
Yeah, and pause it again. And this is something that that needs to be, because again, like he referred to Africanist, like the Africanist, linguistic classification, which
Mm,
is synchronic. And synchronic means contemporaneous, living languages that occur at the same time, right?
mm,
Now, the Africanist version of language classification, as I explained before, is not the same as historical linguistics. And some of them try to confound the two. And again, Shamar Kikeda, he's an excellent scholar. He's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant mind. But a lot of the reason why it's really difficult for us to place and replace this is because a lot of the anthropological field and the understanding of these cultures uses these, labels from the Africanist for practicality, right?
mm, mm.
So like if you point out that, hey, these are two different fields, it makes them uncomfortable and they're more like, oh, we don't want to rewrite the whole textbook. We know that this stuff came from colonial ethnographers, right? We know, like, even terms like, Yoruba and Igbo, which I know a lot of people in the audience would try to debate against this, but a lot of the terms that we use to describe ourselves in Africa are not indigenous to our languages, right?
Yeah,
They're from
yeah.
these Europeans. So that's an important distinction. And this is kind of a thing. We've had this conversation, me and Dr. Keita, before, but this is one of the things that, like, the audience should know, that Africanist linguistics is completely different than historical linguistics.
Right, right. I also let me just do a quick shout out. Thank you. Without history is here, man. That's big news. Says absolutely incredible. I think he's saying that in response to something you were saying earlier. Um, and it's good to see the Walt Cushy back. It's been a while since I saw the brother Walt Cushy in um in these lives of mine. So good to see you, bro. This thing about Afroasiatic, it really gets my goat because it's part of what I noticed, and I suspected it from the get go, but the more why I looked into it, there was a time when I was doing a few videos on and lives on the language uh, family of ancient Egyptian, which what it felt, what African languages could trace their heritage and roots to the ancient Egyptian language. And one thing I found was that so ancient Egyptian, correct me if I'm wrong, is a part of something called the Proto-Afro-Asiatic, right?
Well, they put it as a descendant of Afroasiatic, but
Right.
the problem is that when you're dealing with the protoforms or the ancestral forms, they're not universal across, the nodes of Semitic, Hausa, so-called Cushitic with Oromo and Somali. You
Mm,
don't have, like, if a language is related, like Indo-European, you should be able to easily find hundreds, if not thousands, of cognates in between, the basic lexical items or the core vocabulary: son, mother, father, water, words like that. You should be able to pronouns, numbers. But when it comes to Afroasiatic, they're not able to do that. And the only way that they come close is if they have like 20,000 years plus of time depth that it takes to unify Semitic with ancient Egyptian. So under the Africanist framework, ancient Egyptian would be a descendant of Proto-Afroasiatic, but there's not enough cognates across the nodes to substantiate Afroasiatic. And most historical linguists, Africanists accept Afroasiatic because it comes from their tradition. But most historical linguists who follow the rigid standards of the comparative method do not accept Afroasiatic as valid.
right. Where I was even going was then one thing I found, and it's just a quick digression. One thing I found with the so-called Afro-Asiatic is that in terms of the places that um most in terms of modern day have a modern day what would you say heritage of Afroasiatic, most of those places are in Africa as opposed to outside of Africa on the sort of Asiatic plate or continent. Is that correct? And if that's correct, um you would then think it almost becomes um it becomes moot as the Asiatic side of things becomes moot, because that's almost complete proof or evidence that this language, which clusters, whose descendants cluster mostly within Africa, almost certainly originated within the African continent. So what's the need for the Asiatic? It sounds to me like another way of kind of um blurring the edges, something that firmly belongs to Africans, that Africans can say we birthed. Once again, here come the quote unquote experts to add to add Asiatic, so
What's
that it looks.
worse?
Do you get what I'm trying to say? Go on.
Yeah. It's actually worse because, and Dr. Keita will affirm this, that within Afro-Asiatic studies, there's been a problem of Semitic centrism or Semiticentrism, in the
Mm,
sense that because of the text of the Bible and the Quran and the Abrahamic traditions,
mm,
many scholars have looked at Semitic as the core of Afro-Asiatic, and they first believe that Afro-Asiatic originated in Asia
right.
before going into Africa. Right now, proper reading of the scriptures of the Abrahamic text will tell you that that's false. It'll tell you that, it's actually the other way around,
Mm,
especially if you deal with, certain scholars who have positioned the Garden of Eden, on the African continent. But that's kind of
mm.
a different discussion. But
Yeah, yeah.
generally speaking, today they were able to completely remove, maybe not totally completely, but they were able to reduce the racism that was apparent within Afro-Asiatic studies, which used to be called Hamido-Semitic studies, in trying to call it an Asian that civilized the African, when in reality, if Afro-Asiatic is legit, it is a predominantly African language family rooted in the Red Sea hills of Ethiopia.
Yeah. And just like somebody said earlier in the comments, it's with funny how with ancient Egypt, it's the most contested. There's no that we don't have these debates with Greece, we don't have these debates with Mongolia or wherever else, but it's all over. It's all over. If anything shows any signs of originating within Africa, or something that is given by black skinned peoples, or whatever you might call negroid peoples, to the world, very soon you can rest assured someone's going to come along and say, we kind of have to add Anglo or Asiatic to it, or
Yeah.
something like that. It's a sure fail proof sort of pattern that you will see constantly. And if you study patterns, you know what's going on. Right,
And
let me
before
hit
we
play.
continue, like, I want
Go
to
on.
get
Go on,
everybody
go
in
on.
the audience. Smash Rockwell. He also goes by Jonathan Owens. If you're looking for his text, he wrote a book called Black Like Osiris that I would encourage everybody in the audience to purchase, because he goes through with a fine tooth comb and he finds all of the examples where the ancient Kemites described themselves as black. Right. So if these Europeans want to play all these genetic games about what haplogroup and autosomal analysis, these people, when they were alive, defined themselves and they wrote it in stone for their descendants, us, to see that they were black people. That is how they saw themselves. So to me, that destroys all of the BS arguments, because if you want to know what they were, just look at what they wrote down about themselves.
Wow. I'm getting that book. I'm getting that book. Right, let me
100%.
hit play. Thanks, bro.
You can't look at this and assume that you had a bunch of people line up and say, okay, today we're all going to march out from the Horn of Africa and we're going to split up. This is just a sort of a schematic. Don't think of it that people, got together and say, okay, we're going to split up now. Doesn't quite work that way. We're not going to talk about it. But this is a way to conceptualize the cradle land of the family and the fact that its daughters emerge out of a group of what's called dialect clusters that would have been there. But don't think of something called Egyptian sort of coming into being right here and marching up. or Semitic being formed. Although there is one linguist who does think that Semitic actually emerged in the Horn. That's a minority opinion of one, Grover Hudson. But he does believe that based on the age of, or the amount of diversity in the Semitic languages in the Horn of Africa. Okay. We're in Cambridge, so we'll have to mention Colin Renfrew. The Nostratic hypothesis was developed by Dolgopatsky and some other Russian linguists. Basically, they argue that Indo-European, Afroasiatic, Altaic, and Indo-Dravidian are all related, and that the cradle land for them was in Anatolia, parts of southern Europe, and that they broke off and spread with agriculture. This idea has not won wide acceptance by anybody who knows anything about it. Let me just say that. I don't mean to be rude. The Nostratic hypothesis is not well supported by linguistic evidence. The further you go back in time, the more likely it is that you're going to get accidental resemblances. Also, Proto-Afroasiatic, Mother Afroasiatic was spoken by not agriculturalists, but by hunters and gatherers. So, and the genetic data will not conform to this tree, although it may conform to the northern part of this tree to some degree. It doesn't work in the case of Afroasiatic. But you should know that there are people who advocate for this perspective. And they treat all of these subgroups as daughter languages of a mother Afroasiatic. However,
There's a quick comment
with
I want
regard
to
to
make.
Afroasiatic, there seems to be a growing consensus.
Go on, bro.
There's a lot of this. So I actually read a scholar, I believe they're a German scholar, and they were looking at the origin of spiked wheel traps in Africa. And this is going to be something that I'm going to discuss in a future video, because some of them theorize that the spoked wheel actually was a successor of the spiked wheel trap. And the most prominent area of the spiked wheel trap is in Africa. African, even in ancient Kemet, is where you see the spiked wheel trap. Now, alongside what he just said with Nostratic, these European scholars are using the Nostratic hypothesis to promote the idea that Pelasgians or Eurasians spread the spiked wheel trap into Africa that they already had in West Asia. And then the ones that stayed in West Asia eventually developed that into the wheel. Now, you know, for those of you who are listening, you heard that correctly. What they're saying is that, you know, the wheel was particularly an Asian development, a West Asian development, but the predecessor technology for the wheel is most common today, or most common in the historical record, in the African continent. So if we know that the Nostratic hypothesis is false, it's been debunked, and we have the historical linguistic tools to match these items, these wheel traps on the African continent, there is a very plausible evolutionary trajectory that we could determine for the development of the wheel independently on the African continent. That's it.
Wow. I'm looking forward to that video.
This family is related to Nostratic as a sister language rather than as a daughter, as Greenberg and Harold Fleming had already proposed. So there are other people who do accept the Nostratic hypothesis, but they don't see Afroasiatic as a daughter of Nostratic. They see it as a sister, which means that there would be a mother or a father of both Afroasiatic and the Nostratic groupings. That you could probably make work, and you would make it work by going way back in time, and you would basically say that when you had the Out of Africa movement, that the people who left, the people, at least the northern part of the world, left from a region, say in Northeast Africa, and that the people who were left are the people who wound up speaking Afroasiatic, and that'll work, you know. But in general, those long-distance linguistic hypotheses with the deep time reconstructions don't conform to what most historical linguists think is scientifically provable or valid, and so there are only a handful of people who are engaged in that. Now, in terms of geography, again, we want to have a setting for our culture. And this map illustrates that between 8,000 and 9,000 years ago, the rains had returned to Africa, so to speak, and the lake levels were all high. We had Lake Mega Chad. There were rivers running the Sahara this way, and it is at this moment in time that we see people moving back into the Sahara. In fact, there are not a lot of sites in the Nile Valley at this time, and the people who are in the Sahara, when conditions get worse, eventually move into the valley. So when we look at the pre-dynastic cultures of early Egypt, we see influences from the Sahara. We have Levantine influences, as I mentioned, sheep, goat, cattle, the animals that were domesticated. They actually wind up in the Sahara before they are in the Nile Valley. We find evidence in some cases of for example, goats and goat remains. We think they're goat remains. In terms of the early pre-dynastic, there's a culture called the Tazian, which people have generally put together with the Badarian. But the Tazian has a particular kind of beaker, tulip shape, that has its ancestry, clearly seems to have originated in the Sudan, up and down the Nile Valley from the Neolithic, but probably ultimately of Saharan origin, and not found in the Near East, are these slate palettes. And I don't have any slides of those that I'm going to show today, but just go down to the Petrie Museum in London and you can see some beautiful ones from the Badarian and the Naqada periods. So here we have this slide made from an article published in 2006 in Science that's entitled, and I recommend that you read it, it's about the climate-driven occupation of the Western Sahara.
If anyone's interested, that article, he does what a lot of us speakers tend to do. He doesn't finish the sentence there. But if you're interested, that article is called, I believe, Holocene Occupation in the Sahara, Motor of Africa's Evolution by Cooper, Kuper, and someone else, 2006. Holocene Occupation in the Sahara, Cooper, 2006. So just if you're interested in that, it's a very interesting article. I couldn't finish reading it before this live. Yeah, if you want to check that out, I'm going to hit play again.
And the authors basically say that this was a major factor in early African history. These are sites for which we have good archaeological material indicating some sort of settlements. And then when we go 1,000 years later, we have very few sites here along the Nile Valley. And the toolkits and the pottery in the Nile Valley represent a coherent mixing of the hunting-gathering traditions in the Nile Valley with the traditions from the Sahara. And as I said, with some things, influences from the Sudan in early Egypt. This is more artistic. I normally don't do art, but just to show you, this is from Outoori, who's a Basque Egyptologist. And in this particular article, what he's trying to show is that we can sort of, quote, read Saharan paintings, and we can see similar motifs in early Egyptian art. So you have in early Saharan paintings, you have men with elephants. You don't normally think of elephants being in the Eastern Sahara, but they were there at one time. This motif, men, did he really actually, it's hard to believe the giraffes would let you do this to them, but anyway, it's there. And we see these motifs in Egyptian art. Now, some people have argued that this sort of motif, Taming of the Two Beasts, is actually of Near Eastern origin. Well, okay, let's take the compromise position and say that you may have had traditions of the taming of the wild beast from multiple sources. But nevertheless, you do see it in the Sahara, and in the Sahara, it's older than it is in Egypt or Mesopotamia. This deformation of cattle horns, still seen in southern Sudan today, was also practiced in the Sahara. And in this rather late depiction of a cow in ancient Egypt, we see the same practice going on. Here's some more things. Again, certain similarities from the Saharan art seen also in Egyptian art. So again, this is just to talk about an archaeological connection of regions in Africa and the surrounding areas being connected to the Nile Valley. We've already talked about language as well.
He's about to go into the heart of why I even wanted to do this live, which is genetics. But I this thing can't be on. It can't be what's the word? Overplayed. Okay, what he's saying there is that there's already and again, Kamji can come in and correct me if I've got him wrong. But what he's saying there is that we've already got quite a lot of archaeological basis for suggesting, for believing that this civilization archaeologically moved out of Africa from within Africa into the place we now know as geographically as Egypt. And that article was in aid of that. That article, if you read it, is talking about how the climate changes that were going on in Africa pushed people out of the Sahara and into that corner of northeastern Africa. So these people, we're not talking millions of years ago, we're not talking hundreds of thousands of years ago, we're talking thousands of years ago, within single digits. And these people will not just shift. They're not going to change to, again, Elizabeth Taylor and Charlton Heston because I don't know, because 2,000 years later, or sorry, several thousand years later, they want to appease the sensibilities of some racists. These people were black people. Now, I went around, I've done this again and again in past videos, but if you've never seen the rock art from the Sahara, you ought to go and look into that. Most of them cluster in the Algeria region. The most of the ones I can find are in somewhere called Tassili, Niger. That's another live, by the way. That's another live. The N-word. Okay, go throughout Africa. The N-word is ours, guys. It's actually ours. And it doesn't mean shout out to London. I think London's in here. Been meaning to do that for the longest. We need to talk about the N-word, where it actually comes from. That word is actually ours. Shout out to the Ethiopians in the building, if there are any. Negus. Anyway, Niger or variation, Neger or whatever. Watch the algorithm or the AI catch me out now. But that word is plainly African. Okay. But Tassili, Niger, whatever it is in Algeria, has these amazing groups of just amazing variations of rock art. And you're seeing, apart from seeing animals and sort of forms of what look like forms of animal adoration and worship that are obviously ancestors of what you see later on in Egypt, you also see people who you can only describe phenotypically as Black Africans on this rock art. Now, some idiot, and I use the word quite deliberately, some idiot comes into, actually, there's different types of them. They come, there's different iterations of them. They come again and again. Comes, and when you cite, when he gets into debates with people in the comment section of my videos on this, he tends to ignore people talking about the rock art, because I've seen people bring up the thing with rock art in North Africa before. He tends to ignore it. Now, recently, I think I blocked him recently, but because I couldn't take, he was talking about KFC, and he started talking about KFC and baby mamas, and I was like, do you know what? I'm giving you a long rope. I need to get rid of this guy. So I got rid of him. But he finally addressed the issue of the rock art, and he said something along the lines of, art can be subjective, DNA is not. This is what this is what I'm telling you about. This is what this is what I've been trying to say for the longest. These types like to shift the goalpost, because when he says art can be suggestive, it's never suggestive when it comes to showing us a fake bust of Hannibal, which has been proven to be fake. This fake popular zeitgeist bust of Hannibal. Banoob, surfactants. Good to see you, man. Banoob is his name. Something to Dr. Banoob or something. I don't really want to give him any shine, but that's his name. It's just because you asked. But this guy literally says art can be subjective. You have when this Cleopatra debate started a few years back, one of the first things they bandied about was this bust, this very pristine bust of Cleopatra, which straight away gives red flags as to its authenticity, how pristine it is. But anyway, it we won't debate that. But that's one of the first things they bandied about to shut down the quote unquote Afrocentrists. So art is subjective. Art is subjective until they want to use it to buttress their case. Anyway, we got these thousands-year-old rock arts. And I just want to quickly share with you guys, just in case anybody's not we've got anyone in the house who hasn't seen them, and just tell me how subjective this is. Okay, right, let's have a look. Right, this is what we're looking at. If I do you know what, I don't want to do it this way. Let me take this off. I want to show it to you in a way I can control it. I can zoom in a bit better. Let's go to, let's say, thank you, Surfactant. Surfactant says, good day, my brother. Happy Sunday. Glad to catch a stream finally. $5 super chat. Thank you so much. I tell you what, it feels even better for me. So thank you. All right, so let me do this again. Get that quickly shown up on the screen. Okay, cool. So now I've got that there. All right, so okay, cool. That's what I'll do. All right, so you can see this, and I can zoom in, and you've got these sort of cattle herders, and this is all in North Africa now. This is supposed to be a few, maybe 10,000 years old. These are Neolithic Africans, quote. And you can see them on the left-hand side. You can see the way their hair is formed. That's not sort of that's not supposed to be metaphorical in any way. That's their hair. Okay, so far as we know anyway, no one's made any suggestion otherwise, but you can see the forms of these people. You can see them walking around presumably naked, or for the most part naked hair. Okay, let's keep going. And you have these same sorts of cattle herding sort of cattle tradition in East Africa, all the way along the East African belt there. You got these individuals here in the background with their cattle, and then you've got these other individuals. Again, these hairstyles that you can see are the kind of stuff that nobody honest, okay, nobody honest, or at least without any form of pre-indoctrination, can look at the hairstyle being donned by these people on the African continent tens of thousands of years ago and not say that this is African hair. Okay, African hair, right? You can't look at this and tell me these are not African peoples. I see the King's Monologue says Fulani hairstyles still popular. Yes, you can actually go and find people in the region of sort of north and the middle belt of that Sahara region across Niger, Chad, still wearing these hairstyles. It's not a mystery. They didn't go and have a look at these caves and then say, "Oh, I like that hairstyle. I'm gonna switch up to that." No, they've been doing this for thousands of years. Okay, right. Let's keep going. This is one I got off Instagram of African rock art. Shout out to this brother. What Kato was talking about there was giraffes. So there was a time when the Sahara literally had giraffes, and guess who was herding them? Guess who was brother with an afro? I think that's an afro. That's the only sense I can make of that. Um, what's going on there with this person there. But again, animals that today are well restricted within quote unquote sub-Saharan Africa, they're in the Sahara, and what looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the chat, what looks like a sort of a chariot there, something on wheels. I think that I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you're seeing something kind of like a plow, something being plowed. So this idea that Africans, these people always talk about things that people have done and moved on from, like as if like the wheel. This is one of the weird memes that comes up. Oh, African never had wheels. Well, it turns out like literally we had it on a t-shirt in a rock
Yeah,
somewhere.
and
Been
I'm
there,
gonna
done
go
that, got the
into
t-shirt.
the short distances that most of these ancient people use the wheel, like riverine transport and the camel was much more efficient. But
Mm,
even if you look at Europeans, I think it's the 17th or 18th century that most European nations adopted the wheel wholesale. I'll have to double check
wow.
that in my research. But when it comes to guns, when it comes to the wheel, even when it comes to like multi-story structures, they're not far off from the general usage of these things that they claim Africans were so far behind. So there's a lot of Eurocentric, propaganda with respect to a lot of these technologies that they valorize because they think it gives them cultural supremacy.
Yes, yes, exactly. Just some more rock art here, guys. Just some more. I don't know if people can see this clearly, but these are I don't know if you can describe this as anything other than African people. These are the people that are referred to as subjective. It's subjective. This is something else. That's a spoiler there. All right, let me just close this down and get back to the topic at hand. Um, I'll remove that. Add this back to stage.
Anthropology is what everybody thinks that biology tells you everything. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. But since many of us believe it does, we're going to talk about it. The problem with previous work in general is that they were based on what I call race models, and all the traditional racial studies are deductive. That is to say, they assume that you have some, quote, racial types, well-defined anatomical complexes, sets of physical traits, such that whenever you see an individual who doesn't fit either one, your explanation is that they must be a mixture of the two extremes, okay? Now, of course, we see people in real life who have one parent from one place and one parent from another place, so it's quite possible that, so we have actually seen people who are that way. But the question is that the explanation in all places and for all times? Well, if you believe that, then you leave Darwin out of the picture. You believe a notion of evolution and other kinds of processes out.
I just want to say a quick shout out to Ian Chaldean. Thank you. Do Mario says thank you. I should have been in there first. That's a very generous gift from yourself, and that means a lot. Thank you for that $50 super chat. No message whatsoever, just a generous donation. I really appreciate that. Thank you, brother. I'm going to hit play again.
So one type of study works from a presumption of groups that mix. The other kind of study takes a little bit different point of view, and it's usually involves mathematics, whereby you measure up something, you submit it to the computer and see where things cluster or where they group. That always is not foolproof either, because you need a model. You need a model. So you ground your discussion, from my point of view, in talking about African diversity, okay? And these are the different sub-areas of human biology that have been useful: skeletal biology, genetics, DNA, that all feed into us being able to talk about population diversity and origins. As I've said earlier, I believe that you have to use archaeology, linguistics, and history. You have to talk about populations versus what are called typological studies. You have to be willing to talk about your methodology and whether or not just because you measure it and you get results from the computer, that this is easily interpretable without a model. You have to talk about the history, the sociology of knowledge. That is to say, are the facts determined by people in power? You have to talk about history of ideas. And we want to talk about phenotype versus descent. Now, the easiest way to talk about this is to understand that in this little diagram here, think of this as an ancestral tree, and you've got A and B and C as the descendants from some ancestors here. And this similarity is a similarity, it refers to how closely they resemble each other. And this word descent here actually refers to where they're connected. A, B, and C are equally similar, but B and C are more recently connected in terms of ancestry. Okay? Now there's a lot of technical language around this, which you know we can talk about later, but this is very, very important because there are different populations in the world that look very similar to each other, but they're not closely related when you do genealogy and DNA. There are people in New Guinea, and I'll just use this as an example, in islands in Oceania, who, to the average eye, to the typical eye, and we talk about this, oh, they look like Africans. But when you do a genealogical study with DNA on them, they are Asians, okay? They belong right where they are. And then there's some people in Africa who don't look like each other, who are genealogically more closely connected, okay?
Kamji, do you want to explain the significance of that, or do you want to wait till later on? Because I feel like you want to wait till later on.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let's go.
Depending on what kind of data you use, this uses traditional blood groups, you know, ABO, your blood type, and proteins in your blood, and then they did an analysis and they got clustering. And when they did it this way with the blood groups, they had the Africans and the Europeans were more similar to each other, and the people from Australia and North America and India were more similar to each other based on these genetic characters from the blood. But when they did cranial studies, they found that people from Papua New Guinea and the Australian Aborigines and certain Africans clustered together, and people from North America and Chinese, Japanese, people from Asia, Polynesia, that they clustered together. Now, which one is the truth? This is some old data. I see people looking. These are studies that were done when many people here were probably quite small. But anyway, there was a conflict here. There's conflict here. All of this is science. All of this is science. This is blood groups. You know, blood type, you know, proteins in the blood, and these are studies from the skeleton. The computer generated both of them. The data are real. Which one tells the truth?
Right, I'm going to come in here. Does anyone in the chat want to do like a quick, 10-word summary of what he's saying there? 10-word summary of what the Professor Keita is saying there in relation to these fake studies on ancient Egyptian DNA that get churned out every 6-7 years. Anyone? That's when I was playing this, listening to this as a sort of sometimes I like to listen to something put me to sleep. If I can't sleep, I turn something on that my subconscious can learn from as I go to bed at night time. And that's when I clicked play on this. This has been on my watch later list for the longest. And I just clicked it and I thought, right, let's watch this, because I've been procrastinating with this one for a long time. It's a heavy duty speaker. And I couldn't, it was just just kept getting hit with waves of knowledge after knowledge, and when it got to this bit, I couldn't go to sleep at all. I just like, okay, wow, I see now. I understand. I understand much more. So I pen this in mainly because of this part. Okay, so no one seems to want to take the thing up. It's a point that's been made again and again, and it's a point that the people who did the Nuweirat study pretended not to know about. Because if you look at the Nuweirat study, they say things like they do this genomic study, and they say 80% is found of the Nuweirat man, his genome is found in Morocco, and 20% from the Near East. And then they proceed to kind of give like 20-second dissections of what that means in terms of what he looks like. And in that dissection, they said they're kind of going, and he's dark brown, the dark into black brown, you go dark hair. They did that kind of a thing. You know, when the kid's in trouble, when we were in trouble, and you know, you've been asked to fess up. That thing where you kind of flub over the important bits, like so say Johnny and I don't know Jane are in trouble, and Johnny, I'm Johnny now. I know that I started this mess. And now Jane is giving me a big old lump on my head, and I'm trying to get Jane in trouble for the big old lump on my head. And you know, normally if mom's come back from a hard day at work, done her shift and thing, and she just wants to sleep and chill, all she cares about is that big old lump on my head. And Jane's gonna get it. Jane's gonna get it for giving me that big old lump. But if mom had a bit more time on her hands, okay, mom has a bit more time on her hands, and she does a bit more investigation. She says, Johnny, yo, what? Come on, I know Jane. She can't just come and hit you upside the head just for no reason. What happened? What did you do? What didst thou, my son, to deserve that big old thing on your head? What? That's the bit where you start going, yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, I was doing a bit, yeah. That's that's what they did with the Nuweirat study. When it came time to describe what in real terms Nuweirat man, what their other analyses showed in effect Nuweirat man would have looked like in reality, they completely just kind of fluffed over that bit. It would have been a quick murmur, and that speaks to what Shamaka Keto I feel is saying here, is that the study of the haplogroups thing is not the be all and end all. Okay, so sometimes you get people with the same haplogroups, and I made this point in my past videos as well. You get people with the same haplogroups who look, when you do the actual phenotypic studies, who look nothing like each other. And sometimes you get people who are from different haplogroups or have different haplogroups, single parental markers, and they look very similar. And that's the thing that they're constantly hiding behind these studies, is these wider sort of biometric analyses. But I believe even in Kamji can help me out there, even with the study of the genetics, you can tell, because aren't there certain genetic markers, like the skin color. I can't remember what I had London on a few weeks back, and London was talking about how S4LC something is the genetic marker that denotes certain, whether it's a pale person, a light skinned person, or a
You
dark
talking
person, and whatnot.
about
Go on, Cam.
SLC 24A5
Right,
and SLC 45A2.
right. Just out of interest, did that show up for the new Iraq man? Did that show up in the study? Did any?
Well, New Rat was dark to black skin, so he had
Mm,
the darkest possible. You know what I'm
right,
saying? He was really, really dark.
right, right. Did I flub that, or am I characterizing what Shamaka Kate is saying there properly?
Yeah,
What do you?
I mean, King's monologue, he talks about this a lot, where the genetic diversity of Africa is weaponized by people who are bad actors. You have on one side um, these Eurocentrist and racist scholars, Hamiticist scholars, who are constantly trying to divide, northern Africa, the northern portion of the continent, from the southern portion. When, as you laid out through the rock art, through the petroglyphs, within the human period, most of the African population was in the so-called Saharan zone in the north, right? So that's one side who tries to weaponize it, and then you have people who will look at, like, say, the Andaman Islanders and different groups of populations who phenotypically resemble their ancestors who left the continent, but because there was a lot of divergence or genetic drift, they may be closer to Asians or an external, non-African population than they are to an African population genetically,
Mm,
right? And there's a lot to be said there, because the dark skin gene within Melanesians and Andaman Islanders and so-called Negritos is African in origin, right? The skin that makes their or the gene that makes their skin dark. But with genetics, like, there's a lot of things that can be quite confounding, because you could have a you know a European Y chromosome lineage or European paternal lineage, but be a Mexican person or an Asian person or an African person, and vice versa. I think Adolf Hitler had E1B1B. Same thing with Napoleon, which is an African paternal marker, right?
wow.
And father, 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 mother, mother, mother obviously passes that down. So there's a lot of things that it takes a lot of external corroboration with
Mm,
respect to fields like genetics in order to be able to parse things out. But at the same token, like, there are people who could be like people in Douala who are light skinned, Igbos who are light skinned, people on the African continent from Sudan to as far south as South Africa who
mm,
have keener features, but that's just because of the cladistic evolution, right? That's not necessarily because of external admixture per se,
mm,
right? So there's a lot of people think just because you have mixture from outside of Africa, you would change the degree of variability that we see on the African continent, but that's not always the case, because it's a lot more complex when it comes to the development, the prenatal development and what you see once a baby is born with respect to their past and their lineage. So I see him as being meticulous in his explanation of that.
mm.
And that level of rigor is something that you will not see within conventional genetic studies,
Thank
because
you.
they're trying to push the Hamitic myth, and they already come in with a framework, and they're trying to justify these people are Mesopotamian, these people are Levantine, when, even as Kata stated earlier, there's no archaeological evidence of a mass group of people migrating and spreading, agricultural items and their various, social instruments into Northeast Africa. Like, during the Neolithic transition, you don't see that. What you do see is some domesticates from West Asia being incorporated into an African mode of production and an indigenous foraging strategy, but you don't see a wholesale replacement. And even if you look at the geophysics, or you look at the level of the delta, around 7,000 years ago, it was completely marsh. It was completely flooded, if you will, and there wasn't really an area for people to settle within the delta. And then as the years went by, people started migrating from the south up into the north. So even the geophysics of the region itself disprove the so-called invading pharaonic race theory.
I'm gonna hit play. I'm gonna hit play. I want to say something there, but I've said it in some way or the other
Sure.
before, and I'll probably say it again later on. But thanks for that.
Yep.
I put this up here to just let you know that you probably always need a model of interpretation based on wider sets of data. And in the current era, it's probably true that the DNA sequence data for certain markers will give you a tree that's different from both of these, and that you need a model rooted in concepts about African diversity to really understand it. Okay? Now, when it comes to Egypt, there's been a lot of previous work, some of it done right here on the Cambridge collection. Very famous study, Mukherjee et al., 1955, with Professor Trevor, who was here at Cambridge Department of Physical Anthropology. Overall, if you looked at all of these studies, none of these studies will actually show or suggest, with the exception of a few, that the Nile Valley people, called the Egyptians, were from any place else but Northeast Africa. Okay? There are other studies done with dental work and limb ratio. We talked about tropical body plan. And this is what I mean when you talk about in the state of our current knowledge, we have to understand there's a long presence of modern people in Africa. The coalescence times, the times to which you get to a common ancestor for many molecules, is so old that it generally places many of them in Africa, but not all of them. We have fossils all over in Africa, in Algeria at 60,000 years BP, but we have other fossils that have been dated that are essentially modern humans to around 190,000 years ago. The northeast quadrant of Africa seems to contain a subset of wider variation in Africa, and maybe the rest of the world contains a subset of this. In Africa, you have different ecozones, different demographic histories, and therefore we should expect a large amount of variability. Now, the methods that have generally been used, especially on skeletons, include these different methods that are involved. In one case, just looking at aspects of the anatomy, we call that a morphological approach. Not commonly used anymore, but in the past it was quite common. Now we use these other statistics that are usually based on measurements. Okay, some are more valid than others, we believe, from a mathematical point of view. Although sometimes you get very similar results no matter what you do. This is a human skull, and these characteristics that are shown here are called non-metric traits or traits, and these are just basically anatomical variations. These traits are sometimes called epigenetic, and many people believe that, at least for certain circumstances, that using these traits are sort of like using DNA from the skeleton. My own opinion about any of this kind of research is that at a certain level, in restricted time frames and in local areas, I think that these methods are very valuable. When you start doing global things, you have to be very careful about your traits. You're going to get some parallel examples of what might be called groupings based on parallel evolution, like we saw with the Australians and New Guineans clustering together with certain Africans. In Egypt, we have, as I said, a long history of human habitation. Not a lot of fossils, but things going back to 55,000 years ago, which according to some geneticists is before the period of time that modern humans left Africa, at least through the northern exit. So we've had people there. So any idea that you had to populate Egypt from the Near East even 50, 60,000 years ago is not necessary. There have always been migrations back and forth, but to explain supra-Saharan Africa, as I like to say, based on migrations from Eurasia is not well founded. The Naslit-Carter specimen that I just mentioned here before, in one study by Gunter Brauer, plotted in a multi-discriminant analysis, plots with, quote, modern sub-Saharan Africans, but very near the line. I'm suspect of doing certain things with old specimens in this manner. But nevertheless, and in another study using a different set of variables, we see overlap in multiple directions. Number one, there's a lot of overlap in the middle. That's the important thing to understand. The crania from Dar es Sultan 5 dates to around 60,000 years ago. It has clustered with a group of Upper Paleolithic European skulls, as well as overlapping with North Africa. Only problem with 60,000 years ago and these Upper Paleolithic skulls, I mean, what's the problem with that? Let me ask you. They have material from Upper Paleolithic Europe, and they have this Dar es Sultan cranium or partial cranium, which is probably about 60.
So he's about to ask a pretty cool question. I thought I had it when I was watching it myself. I didn't. So if anyone thinks they know the answers to the question he's about to ask, press 1 in the chat, or just and we'll kind of wait for you to type it in. But nobody in this Cambridge audience could answer him.
60,000 years old, and it's clustering with the Upper Paleolithic Europeans. So does that mean that it came from Europe? That would be our reflex, right? Does it mean? You can talk.
No.
Why not?
Because, if it came out of Africa.
Huh?
If it came out of Africa.
Well, no, but I want you to answer this a very specific way. We have Upper Paleolithic European material, and we have this specimen that's 60,000 years old, and from North Africa, and it's clustering, it's grouping with Upper Paleolithic Europeans. So did it come from Upper Paleolithic means modern people, but the rest of these specimens, I can tell you in this study, came from Europe. So does it mean that Dar es Sultan came from Europe? It's clustering with them. Come on, we got Cambridge students here, right? PhD, master students, somebody? Oh no, people are shaking their head. Oh, good. There were no modern people in Europe 60,000 years ago. There were no modern people in Europe 60,000 years ago. So the fact that it clusters with them cannot be used, now you wait, to say that it came from Europe, because there was nobody in Europe for it to come from. The issue of when similarity means genealogy is always the issue in these kinds of studies. I don't care what the data are, with the possible exception of certain kinds of Y chromosome data and the mitochondrial DNA from women. Now, when it comes to Egyptian crania, the kinds of descriptions that used to be used, in early days, good Brits, Cambridge, Oxford guys, talked about the pre-dynastic race of Egypt. They say, in the main, a blending of various proportion of Semite and Negro. And this is from an old book, The Earliest Inhabitants of Abydos. Well, what's very interesting about that is that this is from a typological perspective. You get something that's in the middle that seems to have different traits. Well, I would argue no, it's not a blending of anything. It's just own people that from a biogeographical perspective evolved right there in Northeast Africa. But this is what happens when you have a preconception about human variation being digitalized. So when you see something in the middle, a long time ago, you assume that it has to be the result of certain kind of mixture. Sometimes this might be true, but you can't prove it in a case like this, And then another study more recently from Eugene Struhal talked about the Badarian crania showed mixed, quote, racial traits. Depending on how you analyze the Badarian series, they will cluster with tropical Africans, or they'll cluster with other Northeast Africans, Super-Saharan Africans. If you use a big database and you put extreme variance in it, they'll cluster in a group with Northeast Africans, and that whole cluster will cluster with Europeans. If you use another set of variables, you'll get the Northeast Africans clustering out, and the Europeans will cluster over here, and the other Africans will cluster over there. Again, the issue is understanding your methods. This is from the Mukherjee, Rao, and Trevor study that I mentioned. This is just a plot from this book, from their book, actually. And what we see is that these early Egyptian and Nubians clustering with each other. New Kingdom Nubians, C group, A group, Kerma. We see the Badarians down here. And they have this other series called Egyptian Negroes of Dynastic Age, and I'm still not clear on where that came from. And then you have some late dynasty Egyptians from the north, from Giza, and 9th dynasty, grouping on the other side. But here you have this cluster of Nubians in the middle, okay? All right, here's another example. Same study, only I took their data and ran it again, but get a similar picture. Okay, I've been told that I've got time. There's another study done by someone in France. Northwest African material, Saharan material, something from Mali in West Africa, and the Badarian over here, again showing an intersection of this material. Another study actually shows the same thing. Let me just show you this real quickly. Material from Giza, from Nubia, Nakada, all Egyptian sites, clustering in with some material, some old material from East Africa, here and down here. But the point here that I want to make is for those who want to say that there's no overlap in the metric characteristics of early Egyptians and other Africans, it's not true based on this study. Otherwise, they should have been clustering outside all by themselves, and they don't do that, okay? When we talk about, here's a W.W. House's study, clustering with a technique called successive mergers. You take the two most similar, and then you add, and then you add, and then you add. In this case, the late dynastic Egyptian series clusters with Europeans. Then when you use another method, clustering by successive splits, where you look at the whole group, I got 20 oranges, and I say, how can I divide them in half? So the computer divides them in half and then subdivides them. In this case, the Egyptians cluster with the other Africans and some other tropical people, Andaman Islanders from.
Okay, Kamji, can you I'll give him a good stretch there. What's he saying here specifically? Do you know?
Can you
Help me
rewind
out.
it back so I could catch the last part?
Okay, I'm going to take it back a bit.
Get them, the Northeast Africans clustering out, and the Europeans are
Further back? Or is that all right?
cluster over here, and the other Africans will cluster. Oxford guys, talks about the pre-dynastic race of Egypt. They say, and in the main, a blending of various proportion of Semite and Negro. And this is from an old book, The Earliest Inhabitants of Abydos. Well, what's very interesting about that is that this is from a typological perspective. You get something that's in the middle that seems to have different traits. Well, I would argue no, it's not a blending of anything. It's just own people that from a biogeographical perspective evolved right there in Northeast Africa. But this is what happens when you have a preconception about human variation being digitalized. So when you see something in the middle, a long time ago, you assume that it has to be the result of certain kind of mixture. Sometimes this might be true, but you can't prove it in a case like this, And then another study more recently from Eugene Struhal talked about the Badarian cranium showed mixed, quote, racial traits. Depending on how you analyze the Badarian series, they will cluster with tropical Africans, or they'll cluster with other Northeast Africans, Super-Saharan Africans. If you use a big database and you put extreme variance in it, they'll cluster in a group with Northeast Africans, and that whole cluster will cluster with Europeans. If you use another set of variables, you'll get the Northeast Africans clustering out, and the Europeans will cluster over here, and the other Africans will cluster over there. Again, the issue is understanding your methods. This is from the Mukherjee, Rao, and Trevor study that I mentioned. This is just a plot from this book, from their book, actually. And what we see is that these early Egyptian and Nubians clustering with each other. New Kingdom Nubians, C group, A group, Kerma. We see the Badarians down here. And they have this other series called Egyptian Negroes of Dynastic Age, and I'm still not clear on where that came from. And then you have some late dynasty Egyptians from the north, from Giza, and 9th dynasty, grouping on the
Shout out to the Egyptian Negroes.
the other side. But here you have this cluster of Nubians in the middle, okay? All right. Here's another example. Same study, only I took their data and ran it again, but get a similar picture. Okay, I've been told that I've got time. There's another study done by someone in France. Northwest African material, Saharan material, something from Mali in West Africa, and the Badarian over here, again showing an intersection of this material. Another study actually shows the same thing. Let me just show you this real quickly. Material from Giza, from Nubia, Nakada, all Egyptian sites, clustering in with some material, some old material from East Africa here and down here. But But the point here that I want to make is for those who want to say that there's no overlap in the metric characteristics of early Egyptians and other Africans, it's not true based on this study. Otherwise, they should have been clustering outside all by themselves, and they don't do that, okay? When we talk about, here's a W.W. House's study, clustering with a technique called successive mergers. You take the two most similar, and then you add, and then you add, and then you add. In this case, the late dynastic Egyptian series clusters with Europeans. Then when you use another method, clustering by successive splits, where you look at the whole group, I got 20 oranges, and I say, how can I divide them in half? So the computer divides them in half and then subdivides them. In this case, the Egyptians cluster with the other Africans and some other tropical people, Andaman Islanders from there. Here's a study that I did, 19 variables, which I happen to think is pretty good. The Giza stuff still clusters with Europeans. Northern Delta Egyptians doesn't surprise me. But the Kerma Nubians, the Somali, the Bedouin form a group together, some Khoisan, and they form together a secondary cluster with Tata and Dogon, with other Africans, in other words. This
But that shouldn't surprise anyone. What he said, just like he said, doesn't surprise me. Cam, do you want to explain now why he
Yeah.
said that shouldn't surprise him?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you're dealing with the most genetically diverse continent in the world. Not only are you going to find dolichocephalic skulls, but you'll find brachiocephalic skulls, especially among like the Twa and related populations. So under certain analyses, when you see certain people, like say, Somalis or Habeshas, clustering with aquiline populations,
Yeah.
or even certain San populations clustering with Eastern Asians with respect to their epicantral folds or their skin complexion. That's just speaking to the diversity of the African population and being weary of certain individuals who want to weaponize, and they'll try to put Nubian clustering in the North African, which they've done before. They'll try to put some of the African humid populations as a Paleolithic European, when he said that there's no modern humans in Europe 60,000 years ago. So the modern humans after that point would have had to come from Africa. So it's no mistake or no surprise that a humid period, 8,000 years ago, Northern African, or 8,000 years ago, Saharan Tassili person would have a cluster with the Paleolithic European, before the modern populations of Europe came in.
Right.
So
Right.
if you understand the genetic diversity and just the history of human migrations, all of that data makes sense.
Right. And I wouldn't have understood this in a real sense if I myself hadn't. I mean, the problem with a lot of these people who are doing these papers as well is that they actually have no nitty-gritty understanding of the things that they're talking about. They don't actually, everything's just on paper for them, and they just vomit out their preconceived racialist notions in their conclusions. But
Yep.
for someone like us, people like us who actually are Africans or African Americans, and we live with the people that we live and we breathe and we breathe with black people. I've got Ethiopian friends, actually Ethiopian, the modern nation of Ethiopia today, who very varied in look. Like you said, some of them have the aquiline look. The skin complexion is black, is to all intents and purposes what you'd call black, but they're very varied in look. Hair is like ours. Sometimes a little, I don't know what the different what do you call it, 4C type hair, and I don't remember what the most kinky type of hair texture is. I think mine would fall into that. Sometimes one or half a level less than that. But again, I've got Ethiopian friends whose mom look very different to them. More aquiline features in the mom, and the son comes out and is quite much more, you would say, maybe even West African looking. But that's something that you can see in live, like in real time, if you actually live cheek to jowl with the people that you're, writing all these theories about.
Little thing is called a septal
What's that?
Yeah, I was just agreeing.
Yeah.
aperture. It's felt to be a genetic trait. When you do an analysis of frequencies on this trait, you find out the Badarians, 50% of the individuals, and it's a very small sample here, had at least one of these septal apertures from cargo aces during the Coptic period, 55%. Other Egyptians from Lisht, should be Lisht, 45, 43%. The Somali, 52%. Japanese, Ainu, 11 to 15%. Quote unquote American Negroes, you can tell this is from an old paper, 18%. Whites born in the USA, 5.2%. Anyway, what this is saying, the Northeast Africans and North Africans have a high percentage of this septal aperture, Wadi Halfa, Jebel Sahaba, and also the material that Alison Brooks found down in Zaire that's 25,000 years old. Almost all of the individuals have it too. The length, the ratio of the distal segment of the upper limb to the upper limb, thought to be related to a tropical body plan. We see the Badarians here, the median values, 0.78, sort of in this whole middle of things. But even interestingly enough, Algerians from earlier periods have very elongated limbs along with the Somali. I was surprised by that myself. Some DNA stuff that we all love. This is a particular haplotype. We can talk about it later. But if you look at Egypt, Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, Egypt, and Libya, you just need to know that this 4th, 5, and 11 are haplotypes that are common in Northeast Africa and other parts of Africa. You see a certain percentage in Egypt, but the 7 and 8 are more common, as you see in Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq. So Egypt, once again, even the modern population is grounded in Northeast Africa. Okay, I'm being told. This is the actual family tree here. What's important about this is one thing I want to say, and then I'm going to stop. This is uniparentally inherited. This is a Y chromosome passed from father to son to son to son. This particular DNA marker here, PN2, is sort of the background, and that's what this means. It's the background of 73% of all of the peoples in Africa today. 73%. The PN2 is found in West Africa and sub-equatorial Africa. The P2 or M2 as it's called. This M35, 215 M35, is what you find in the Horn of Africa up to Egypt and over to Morocco. It corresponds to the 5 and the 11 in the previous slide. This is the father of both groups of Africans. This binds the continent together, okay? So although you have Berbers with blue eyes and blonde hair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they share, for the most part, this PN2 ancestry with people in West and tropical Africa. This is the modern population.
Yeah, this is going to be.
And they share much less.
Agree with what he's saying, because we've had these debates before, and there are so many people who are bad actors who want to say that the white Berbers are African. And if you use EP2, you can actually make that argument. However, I don't think that their gene pool is solely related from intra-African drift. You know, King's monologue actually brought this point to me that I never considered. But if we think about the immense number of slaves or Slavs who were traded from Eastern Europe into North Africa by the Arabs and the Ottomans, I think it's pretty obvious where a large chunk of their genetic ancestry came from. You know, I don't think that's entirely African as he's suggesting. That's all.
Say that last part again. What's not entirely African?
I don't think the gene pool of North Africans, solely looking at their EP2, ancestry, is completely African. Because even if you look at the Imahag or the Tuareg people, there are populations like the so-called Tuareg and Tahal region of Libya and the Tuareg region of southern Algeria who have so-called North African markers at like an 80% clip. So if anything, those are the people who you would look to as remnants of the ancient North African population that they try to call Proto-Berbers. But a lot of these coastal white Berbers, even though they do have EP2, I think if we look at, especially on the autosomal level, if we look at all of the different histories of Slavs being traded
Of
as
course,
captives, it's obvious.
of course, of course. Which isn't, they don't talk about that enough. They don't talk about that nearly enough. But we know that that's part of the historical record. Um, so it's kind of come to the end here, but I want us to watch it to the end because I just want you guys to see this weird interplay between sort of two people questioning him at the end and just see what you make of it. And then I got some interesting questions for Kamji.
Of the M89, which comes off the tree in another way. I'm going to finish here. This is an old slide. I'll just stop here. Okay, well, that's where it stopped anyway, doesn't it? Okay, all right.
Any questions about Shamarka's presentation? Okay.
You mentioned about there being no Europeans 60,000 years ago. Can you tell me when they first went into Egypt? When the Mediterranean people first went into Egypt?
When I talk about 60,000 years ago, there being no modern people in Europe, what I'm saying is the best evidence that we have for modern people being anatomically, what we call anatomically modern people in any part of Europe is at the outside 40,000 years, okay? And when you talk about Mediterranean people, we need to talk about that later on because, as I have said and tried to say, Africans don't all look alike. So some of what you're calling Mediterranean people are just some more Africans, okay? Now, you have to get your arms around that. And that's what that last slide was about with the PN2 transition. Because most of the people there who have that PN2 transition, that particular gene, that genealogy, in its derived form is M35. For example, Berbers are M35, M81. Those people don't look like Congolese. But I'm trying to have you understand that they are carrying genealogically, in terms of their male ancestry at least, they're carrying something that ties them to the rest of the continent and does not tie them to Europe, even though physically, externally, you may say, well, gee, they look like Europeans. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're gonna have
So
to do
when you ask me, when did X,
and Berber, like we're gonna have to do it because I don't 100% disagree with what he's saying. Like, there's obviously some people in North Africa who, by the nature of cladistic evolution, may have evolved lighter skin traits. I definitely think that that's possible, but like I said before, with the evidence that we have, especially these white coastal populations,
Yeah,
it's just something that we have to do a deep dive in just to
yeah,
expose the flaws.
yeah. Okay.
we don't use those concepts of Mediterranean race, Alpine race, Nordic race, all that's from another era. You know, it's descriptive, and in actual fact, you will find, you can find individuals all over the world who might conform to one of those sort of categories. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So then,
That's the same thing they say about being Arab. Arab is a culture, not a race. It means traveling person.
okay, but I'm trying to understand, what are you asking me here?
Well,
you asked me very specifically, you asked me, when did Mediterranean people get to Egypt? I don't know what you mean by Mediterranean, but let me
people
repeat
that
myself.
don't look African.
No, well, there's more than one way to be African.
See, this is I feel like I almost expected him to like do a Mr. Fantastic and stretch out and slap this guy. Because especially there when he said, I don't know what you're asking me, and then he said, you asked me. I think he was getting a bit testy here because yeah, I think this guy, we can actually diverge onto the Nuwairat study now, because what this guy is trying to do is essentially what happens is how the Nuwairat study started, because Um, really, uh, that I, my alarm bells went off when I started reading this paper and it started talking about the Levant, and it said 20%, 20%, what you call it, 20% genome from the. I thought, yeah, but you're doing a study on um an Egyptian man. You say that 80% of his genome is found in is North African, and it just seemed like a way to, like, through the back door, getting this narrative about the Levant once more. Why is 20% of, actually, when I looked into it again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm a dilettante here, um 20% of that haplogroup that's supposedly from outside of Africa is found well within Africa also. Is that correct? I can't remember what it was now, what the
Yeah, I
haplogroup was.
mean they use QPADM, and I'm probably gonna because I'm on my phone still. I'm gonna log off and come back on with my computer because then I can bring up the presentation.
Yeah.
They use QPADM, which is basically a fitter model in the sense of if I wanted to take your ancestry, even though you've spoken about being of Yoruba descent, right?
Yeah.
And I put it in the QPADM that's solely Chinese and Koreans, I could get up a percentage of you being 94% Chinese and 6% Korean because those are the two models. And it's going to go with what are you closest to and what makes the most mathematical sense as a fitter, right? So
Mm.
that's what they did. And within their source populations, they didn't use any ancient African DNA, any ancient DNA from the African continent. They solely used these Levantine, Mesopotamian type of ancestries to fit the model. So, and another thing is like they didn't even use ancient Northeast African DNA in ancestry. They fitted it as 80% Neolithic Moroccan on the other side of the African continent. you know, and they did that because they can connect the Moroccans to the Natufians, and to them, that is their way of solidifying the Levantine ancestry. But we know, that obviously these people had African ancestry, especially if we are to promote Afroasiatic. If we're to promote Afroasiatic, Modaman in Ethiopia 45,000 years ago is closest to the Ari, which is so-called Afroasiatic hunter-gatherers. So if we were to validate Afroasiatic, Nurat should have been closer to Modaman than anything. But obviously, they don't.
What's Motorman?
Motaman is a 45,000 or sorry, 4,500-year-old man that was found in Ethiopia. And he's used as kind of like a marker to determine, the spread of Neanderthal ancestry into the African continent. And basically to distinguish between Africans who have remained on the continent and those who have mixed in with Eurasians due to recent so-called back migrations. She's kind of like a genetic litmus test on the African continent to determine ancestry.
Well, this QPM that you were speaking about, can you explain that a bit more? So you're saying that um what does it actually what are they doing there? What explain that to me as if I'm a complete baby.
Okay, so QPADM, if I want to figure out what ancestry you are, and I have some options, right? I have option A, I have option B, right? Now you may have come from C or D. That may be your parents. One of your parents could have been a C population, another of your parents could have been a D population. But within my model, I only have population A and B. So what QPADM does is it takes your ancestry and models it as a percentage of populations A or populations B. And that's a
Right.
two-way model. And you could even do a three-way model, but it's not going to find your legitimate ancestry. It's just giving you the most likely ancestry based upon the source populations that we're using.
Right. And so when they did that, the QPADM they used excluded certain African populations.
Yeah, they didn't use Takakori from ancient Sahara, which is in the middle of Morocco and Egypt. They didn't use Modaman. They didn't use Kudruga from ancient Nubia or ancient Sudan. They definitely didn't use any of the ancient Great Lakes populations, right? And there's even beyond all of this, there's S&P ascertainment bias, which, shout out to King's Monologue. He has an article detailing this. And also shout out to Pan African James, who's one of the Magi archers, out from Texas. He also did a very, very good, analysis of this as well. And really, the S&P panels that they're using are Eurocentrically biased, or in other words, the specific markers that are used to define our genetic ancestry, especially when it comes to uniparental and autosomal analysis, are biased in the direction of Europeans. They're only identifying the single nucleotide polymorphisms or the strips of DNA that help them understand European diversity. But they're not looking at those strips of DNA that give them more details on African diversity and non European diversity. So, what that means is all genetic studies, all genetic analysis is going to be tilted in the direction of Europeans. And without correction factors to be able to mitigate, S&P ascertainment bias, or without whole genome sequencing, all of the analysis that we have is going to have anti-African bias.
I mean, they kind of give the game away. I get exactly what you're saying now. They kind of give the game away when they start with I hope people can see what's on the screen. Let me know if you can or can't. I think you can. Ancient Egyptian society flourished for millennia, reaching its peak during the dynastic period. Blah blah blah. Okay. The body was interred in a ceramic pot within a rock-cut tomb, potentially distributed DNA. Most of its genome is best presented by North African Neolithic ancestry among the available sources at present. Yet, approximately 20% of its genetic ancestry can be traced to genomes represented in Eastern Fertile Crescent, including Mesopotamia surrounding regions. This genetic affinity is similar to ancestry appearing in Anatolia and the Levant during the Neolithic and Bronze Age. Although more genomes are needed to fully understand the genomic diversity of early Egyptians, our results indicate the contacts between Egypt and the Fertile Crescent were not limited to objects and imagery, but also encompassed human migration. Why would you need to do that? I mean, why? So it's like I'm doing a study on an ancient Viking, and for whatever reason, 20% of his DNA is, I don't know, I don't know, give me something, African. Let's do that. What is the I fail to, maybe it's my imagination, but I can't imagine them doing a paper in which they blow up that 20% and say, oh, we want to find out especially in the climate that we are in now, this very ultra nationalist right-wing climate that we're in now. I can't imagine them blowing up the fact that 10%, and I should imagine one of the most illuminating comments I saw on this. It was very like sort of just facetious comment, but it was like, yeah, great, like people traveled, so what? It's like, why would they've devoted already 3 lines to this my potential migration to the east, to the Fertile Crescent, but why would that, what kind of understanding does that give us about actual Egyptian civilization? It doesn't. But this is supposed to be a study on an Egyptian man. And so already I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading this paper, oh, okay, like you've already said at the beginning of this live, they're trying to reestablish this Hamitic thing. They're trying to reestablish this idea that this idea that this was brought in. Whatever was going on in Egypt, whatever created this civilization, was brought in by this from this Fertile Crescent. So already I can see what you're talking about with the QPADM and weighted being biased towards European populations. Really, it's not the Fertile Crescent they're bothered about. It's Indo-European that they really want to establish a link to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And all of these tools that they're using are statistical inferences. A lot of people think that genetics is surefire because when they're looking at genetics, you talk about, mama's baby, papa's maybe, these DNA tests on Maury and, criminality scenes, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it is speculation, and the control populations that they have are important. The source populations that they have are important, and the outgroups. In this study, Modaman, which if we're to promote Afroasiatic, Modaman should have been in the same category as Neurat, but Modaman was used as an outgroup for the study. So that already off the bat, from a methodological perspective, skews the results in a very, very bad direction, right? And PCA, principal component analysis, is another tool that is very flawed, because what it is a dimensionality reduction tool, or more specifically and simply, it's a tool to get complex genetic information that could be understandable on a two-dimensional graph, right? The problem with that is because of the divergences with respect to genetic diversity in Africa and Europe, when you reduce dimensions like that, you risk skewing analysis towards your own biases. And in many cases, you can pretty much use PCA. If you configure the PCA in a certain way, you could use it to pretty much say anything. You could show that Mexicans are more closer to Chinese people than they are to Europeans. You could say that a Nigerian is more closer to an Indian than they are to a so-called Khoisan population, or whatever it is, right? So there are many flaws of genetics. And the problem with this study is the fact that, both this and the Schuneman et al. Study, they're trying to use, one sample, or in the Schuneman's case, 3 bodies, to ascertain the history of an entire civilization over multiple thousands of years. And that's completely flawed. Without external corroboration, that's bunk.
Yeah, I was just saying it's crazy. Yeah.
Right. And I have a let me see if I could share my screen. I can just go through a presentation that I did a couple of months back on the Neurat study. And
yeah, whilst you do that, let me add King to the stage.
For sure.
We got the King's monologue in the building, people. Please make him feel welcome.
Shout out to King.
All right. Starting to stage. No, that's where's he gone? There he is. One sec. Hi, King.
Hello. Good evening, man.
What's good,
Shout
King?
out. How's it going, Kamji? Yes, Tro. Thank you for the invite, man. I've just been sitting back enjoying the live stream, and I noticed you sent me you DM'd me the link, so I thought I'd join, man.
Yes. Why not?
How are you? It's a really good stream, and I'm really enjoying it, man. Thank you for doing this, brother.
No problem, man. This is it's my pleasure. Go on. Shoot us some something from left field.
Well, I don't really think I have to come from left field. I think Kamji's doing a really good job explaining how a lot of this works. I've continued down that area of investigation, down the SMP genotype and arrays, and the bias, the inherent bias. And I've really thoroughly just come to the conclusion that the entire game of genetic analysis, particularly I wouldn't say, in fact, no, let me run that back. The entire field of population genetics, especially from a historical perspective, is very biased and very skewed. And that's not even at this stage, that's not a controversial statement, because the number of papers that have academic papers that have been done on this subject, there've been loads of papers done on this subject. So it's something that these population geneticists, when they're releasing these studies and they're making these really spurious claims, such as the Neurat Man and Takara, all of them basically, Schuneman study, they know essentially that they're being pseudo. They know that. They know that this is incorrect in the field. There have been excuse me, just recovering from a cold. There have been numerous papers, Peterson 2019, Gouveia 2013, Sengupta 2023. These papers have made it not only outlined the fact that these any analysis that is done using genotyping arrays that have essentially been constructed off the back of the 1,000 Genomes Project, and spoiler alert, all of them ones that are used by these population geneticists like the 1240K one and etc. They all use these same genotyping arrays, and they're all biased. They're essentially not fit for purpose for most of the geneticists who do kind of medical studies, because they're aware of these biases that continuously throw up false positives and basically bring back incorrect results. But they are used very favorably by these population geneticists who have an agenda to Europeanize and whitewash world history. And that's why they continue to use them. Even a lot of these papers have outlined protocols to basically say when geneticists use these genotyping arrays, they should be declaring in the extract of their paper, in the abstract of their paper, that they've used these biased sources and what the outcomes of their studies, or how the outcomes of their studies are going to be inherently biased as a result. They should be declaring that, and none of them are doing that. And ultimately, and this is the kicker, they should be utilizing either whole genome sequencing, or there are other genotyping arrays that are more sensitive to African markers, like Kamji was mentioning earlier. They discard African data that is unique to Africans, that can show relationship between Africans, distant and recent, and completely throw out a lot of the conclusions they're making. There are actually genotyping arrays like PopMed AGR, which can return much more favorable results in terms of African data, and they don't use them. They don't even consider them. They don't include them as part of their analysis. So what you essentially have is, we're sitting down and we're making all of these conclusions about how, these studies, and we're having these debates about these uniparental markers and these autosomal results and this, that, and the other. And essentially the entire field is rigged. And, my conclusion is just that I just don't take it seriously at all. That was always my conclusion, but now I feel like it's really strongly and firmly been backed up by the field, or always has been. I just wasn't aware of it. Sorry,
It's a bit,
of a rant there.
no, that's not a rant at all. No, because if you were to go on a rant, you could really go on a rant. You could really go on a rant, because the thing that you said about the sources kind of is just taking off from where Kamji was with the QPA DM thing, and he did a great job of simplifying that for me. But that's it in a nutshell. If the thing that you started off with excluded certain things or peoples at the base, you're just gonna get back what you want to get. Like you were saying with the ABCD analogy, you're always gonna get back what you want. But this is the kind of stuff that the layman doesn't understand. There's no way for the layman to understand that. And even skeptics like myself, there'd be no way unless you consulted others like yourself and Kamji and people like Professor Shamaka Keita. There'd be no way, because I'll give you an example of this. When I started looking into this, a very simple, simplistic example. When I started looking into this, it was with the Herodotus quote. And I might have said this before, but the only reason that I came back to the whole Egypt thing, I was just going to move on and say, do you know what? Benin, we got Zimbabwe, we got lots of other cool things in Africa that we can talk about. I was going to be a Mark II from nothing. People know I'm talking about that guy. But I was going to just do that. But something in me said, no. Look at that again. And I went back to the Herodotus quote, and everyone knows the Herodotus quote I'm talking about. It's the they were black skin with kinky hair type thing. And when I went back to it, I thought, of course, well, we're not just talking about a mistranslation of black skin. This thing doesn't just hinge on a mistranslation of black skin and could possibly be dark skin. He also said they had woolly hair. Now, again, why is he saying that? I say all this to say, unless you've got skin in the game, like myself and other people, you're not even thinking to yourself, let me check that out again. Let me look into that again. This is how evil this stuff is, because and for myself, because I was very open-minded, and I was open-minded towards the Eurocentric narrative, because I just thought, to put it crudely, white is right. These people, all these white folk, all these good white folk can't be wrong. Yes sir, massa. That kind of a thing. These people can't be wrong. They're just experts, neutral, and I almost did that. But again, it just didn't sit right with me. You got this big old stretch of Africa, and nary a black dude ever walked into it because, well, these people say so and they've done the studies. It just didn't sit right. And again, unless you've got the skin in the game, unless you've got that chip on your shoulder to say this doesn't sit right, you just go off and you eat the lie. You eat up the lie. Whereas there are people, the same people who who popularized this narrative of, oh, Herodotus was just talking about dark skin, tan skin. They're sitting on volumes and volumes of other evidence, other quotes that they know about that actually flesh out what Herodotus was talking about. And it's the same here. This can't be a mistake. This can't be accidentally rigged. Like you said, this is something that these people will know intimately. They'll know that they'll know these sort of the whole thing with the QPADM. They'll know that we're dealing with a bias data set here and all of this. So it just goes to show what we're working, the kind of level of an uphill battle. And it kind of shows why they want the debate to hinge on this right now. Why you can make a video showing all manner of evidences, but at the end of the day, you just have somebody come in the comments to say, well, DNA's done away with literal busts. Like these people have literally called themselves. Kamji said earlier in the chat, he said Smash Rock was on a video where the ancient Egyptians is on a book, released a book where the ancient Egyptians, he's gone through all the quotes of the ancient Egyptians calling themselves black people, describing themselves as black people. All of that, we're just supposed to throw it out because some guy somewhere did a DNA test and he said, nah, they was white.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Sorry, Kamji, you've got this presentation up.
Yeah, let me just get into just some of the basics about just the flaw of the study, which is hilarious because when you go to Neurat, dark to black skin, dolichocephalic skulls, tropical body proportions, the only people who have that are black African populations. They're the only people who have those three things, right? And King actually went into more specifics, more forensic specifics, showing that, the craniometrics and the brow ridge, et cetera, were African. But then they said, this is not related to the only people who have these features, which is sub-Saharan Africans. And it just shows the fraud of this study. The body features basically discounted a lot of their statistical inferences, right? And this is important because the authors aimed to prove Mesopotamian and Levantine origins of the mummy, right? But the dark to black skin and tropical body proportions discounted that. And it's important when we're looking at these studies that come out, to pay attention to the peer review, because the peer review analysis is going to give you, what was the original submission, and then how did the referees basically flag things and correct things, along the way, as well as the supplementary information. It's going to give you data that was not being able to be presented within the actual study, just more supporting information with respect to this. So, again, like they began their study of the Nurat mummy with the intention of downplaying any sub-Saharan quote unquote connections. They wanted to promote the idea that this is Mesopotamian because they were trying to support the Shunem Natal study in 2017 that tried to connect, the third intermediate period foreigners. We know that there are foreigners based upon the archaeological record. It tried to connect those foreigners to Mesopotamians and then say that all of the indigenous, Remenkimi populations were Mesopotamian. But the peer review said, I don't trust this. I don't trust the way that you guys are using these tools. And it forced them to shift to a Levantine intermediary using QP-ADM. And you can see here the 80% Meroitic Neolithic and then the Mesopotamian Neolithic as the 20%. Right? So basically, peer review pressure moved them from a total pure invading pharaonic race theory to a Levantine intermediary. And then they settled on a generic, North African Neolithic sources. So basically saying these Moroccan Neolithic people, they're pretty much like Levantines. So that basically shows that the ancient Kemites are Levantine. And this is only after the peer review. And this right here at the top, this top left is a QP-ADM model, just as an example. And you can see these are the source populations that they use in their analysis. And you don't see any ancient African DNA at all present, which is just nasty work. It's just crazy work, And this is what I was talking about before. Modaman, for all of the fans of Afro-Asiatic, despite its flaws, right? If you wanted to prove Afro-Asiatic, this was the perfect opportunity to say that the Nurat man is closely related to Modaman in Ethiopia 45,000 years ago, because Modaman, is most closely to so-called Afro-Asiatic classified hunter-gatherers like the Ari population of Ethiopia. But Modaman is an outgroup. Modaman is considered completely unrelated to Nurat, implying an Ethiopian detachment from the Old Kingdom rather than shared African heritage, right? So they remove infra-Saharan African data, and then they rely on cherry-picked Eurasian proxies to promote a Mesopotamian propaganda.
Andy,
Yeah.
the problem is Motorman is the wrong Afro-Asiatic. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's why they wouldn't include. They don't want Chadic Afro-Asiatic.
No.
They want Semitic. They want Levantine Semitic Afro-Asiatic. So it's always going to be racial for them. They're not interested in like you said, the actual history or the actual anthropology. What they want is to make a racial point, which is what they always lean towards.
Yeah. And if we were to take it as legit, like however you slice it, the Afro-Asiatic ancestor, if it is legit, came from the Red Sea hills of Ethiopia, and it came from African populations. So, like we can steel man their arguments and expose their racism very, very easily.
Absolutely.
Now, this is a EZ830. EZ830 is a specific lineage of the haplogroup. And as King articulated before, even with these uniparental markers, we have to be specific and say that there is some ascertainment bias with the way that the arrays are organizing the SNPs. But a lot of people try to characterize EZ830 as non-black, despite its broad distribution across Eastern Africa. And its descendant, EZ830 is a descendant of EV1515, which is from Northeast Africa. That's E1B1B for people who like to use that type of nomenclature. And that's from Northeast Africa. You see the descendants of EZ830 within EM293. And that's seen across, the Swahili coast and even into Congo and Southern Africa. So the idea that Nurat's Y-DNA haplogroup EZ830 is non-black is completely BS. And that's been debunked if you look at the descendants of that lineage. Now, mtDNA, the mtDNA of Nurat is N1A1B2, as well as I, right? And that's in the Nurat Old Kingdom mummy. And people have tried to use these to negate African affiliation. But the highest diversity of haplogroup I is in the El Molo and Rendili populations of northern Kenya. So Neurat man had a haplogroup that sees its most frequency in Kenya, but they didn't mention it. They chose literally to ignore this to try to promote this. So like on
Well,
both,
how can they do that? How can they do that? Didn't they say that didn't they say literally the opposite thing in the paper? That's a lie. You can't just lie.
well, I mean, most people when they're talking about mtDNA, LO, L1, L2, right? Even in some cases M, to them those are the black mtDNAs. N usually is not considered black. Someone trying to say something?
No, I was just agreeing. I just said, yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In N, I think Takakori in ancient Libya had N. So many scholars believe that N originated in the Green Sahara during the African humid period and then migrated into Asia, right? So, and again, you know, and King's mentioned this before too, you can't use haplogroups to define race because in many instances, like haplogroups originated prior to the advancement of these Eurasian populations in their current location. So all of these haplogroups likely had an African forensic or visual affinity. And maybe, you know, if you believe in the natural selection process, over time those populations changed. But any of these haplogroups, regardless of what it is, if you're talking about 40, 50,000 year origin for these lineages, it's most likely that we would classify them as black today. So this one is really, really terrible, right? They had no black African or no infra-Saharan crania was compared to the Neurat Old Kingdom mummy. Instead, the authors framed the specimen as genetically West Asian, despite dolichocephalic traits, right? Now that's malpractice because dolichocephalic traits are most seen in Africa, particularly and generally speaking in the equatorial zone because of the different bioanthropological rules that say equatorial and tropical climates lead to, you know, extended appendages. And for them to completely not even consider or compare the skull to any African crania and only compare it to West Asian crania to prove that it's Levantine and Mesopotamian. I mean, that's malpractice. It's not even malpractice. That's just fraud. That's lies. Like it's lie, propaganda.
Can I interject here and say,
Yeah,
with the little I know about this compared to both of you, I noticed them. What I've noticed them doing with this dolichocephaly thing for a while now is they're trying to what would be the word? They're trying to make it something. They're trying to extrapolate it out of African populations and make it a strange Egypto type thing that you can only see. So I watched this thing. I think it was by this woman that King's always that's King's Metatron. He's always going on about her. She's
Caroline Wilkinson.
yes, that's it, Caroline Wilkinson. I think it was her.
Yeah.
But she was speaking and she talked about dolichocephaly as being I heard her use the word dolichocephaly, and the next thing I was expecting her to mention was the fact that, oh, this is an African trait. But no, she said she framed it in terms of this is a Egypto-specific trait. This is something only the Egyptians have, and that's just par for the course.
and they
And I
did the
was
same
like,
thing with the limbs too.
Yeah.
go on.
Yeah, I'm saying
gave-
like they found that the limbs are most similar to African Americans, or Neurat is closer to African and African American populations and white populations. And they said it's tropical body proportion, but this is an Egyptian tropical body that's separate from the black tropical
Right.
Yeah. So it's really strange the way the Egyptians have share all of these traits with black African people. Well, they're uniquely Egyptian, you know, they're not black African, they're uniquely Egyptian, but they just happen to share all of these traits of black African populations. Even going back to Neurat man, I mentioned on this when I did my study on him, he has post-bregmatic depression on his skull, which is that little dip in the middle of your skull that a lot of long-headed African people. If you got a long-headed African, they always have that little dip in the middle. You guys know what I'm talking about, yeah?
Yeah.
And to us, it was nothing. It's not even like a big deal. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it's just the head, innit? But that's another African trait. Black people have that trait at around 40%. And the closest population to us to have that trait is Europeans. They have it at 14%. And then in and around Asia, it drops to like less than 2 or 3%. So it's not a common trait. So this is just another trait that you can just chalk up to, another trait common in ancient Egyptians, common in Black Africans. Not saying it's universal. We're not saying that about any of these traits. We're not saying they're universal, but we're just talking about the commonality of these traits amongst Africans is just much higher. It's just typical amongst Africans, whereas outside of Africa, it becomes to the point where it's either a deformity or a rarity,
Yeah.
And I will jump on one thing. They did do a cranial analysis on New Rat Man, but they used the Cranid database, and the model that they used, or at least the database that they used, I think it was called Cranid. I can't remember the number.
Cranid.
18 or 22. I can't remember what the number was,
I'm
but
not sure.
or 16. It might be 16. I think it was 16. And basically, it's a really old database, and it's been deliberately loaded, just like with their genetic analysis. It's been deliberately loaded with basically across the field of anthropology. What you'll find is that Africa is always very poorly represented. They treat Africa like it's the least diverse place on earth, when in reality it's the most diverse place. Not only does Africa have a much bigger population, so therefore should have more representation in terms of its diversity, but in terms of how diverse it is in comparison to Europeans, you should be dealing with about 20 times the number of samples coming out of Africa than you do out of Europe. But in any anthropological database, it's always the reverse. And Cranid's no different. Cranid's is like the representation, I think, is they've got like a Bushman, a Khoisan, and they've got, I think they've got a Khoisan, and I think they've got a Congolese, and just like really like, and that's it. It's not like, and that represents all of Africa. Obviously, they could entirely omit all of East Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes region, Black Sahelians, all entirely omitted from this database. So anyone who was geographically relevant to New Rat Man wasn't analyzed on a craniological perspective. Only those populations that were in and around, the Levant, etc. And obviously these are old as well. So I think the population he came up closest to was Levant, was kind of like Neolithic Levant. Once again, that kind of Neolithic era. So they pulled up a Palestinian man. But if you pull up photos of Palestine from the 1800s, Palestine's full of Black people anyway.
Whoa.
So
Yeah.
Don't go there, King. Don't go there, King.
I don't care. I will. That's a fact. Had large. I mean, it still has Black population in Palestine. Let's be real. So they could be pulling up anyone's skull here and saying that we were talking about a region of Earth that is going to have much larger Black populations. I don't have to say everyone was Black. Okay, I'm not going to make that argument today. We'll save that for another day. But we can at least not deny the fact that the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula and the Levant had much larger Black populations in the time period which they're talking about. So therefore, you can't disqualify based on people being pulled up from those areas. And I do have a cold. Someone just said I sound like I have a cold. I do. That's why I haven't done live streams.
He said, shout out to Izdihar Mohammed Productions. It says, was an explanation provided for why DNA and skulls weren't compared to Africans in Nurat studies? Thank you for that.
Well, no, they did. They actually, because the peer reviewer said, hey, why haven't you compared this to, any so-called sub-Saharan populations? And what they did to fix that is they said that Nurat is a proxy Eurasian ancestor, for East African pastoral populations. So they know that they're related, but they're just trying to make these pastoral Africans, like even some of the Luo populations and the people part of the East African pastoral Neolithic, they're trying to make those Eurasians to save face with Nurat.
Wow.
So
I was
Ridiculous.
watching this. Do you know a lady called Frances? What is it? Welsing.
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Now I came across her. I've got her stuff on Watch Later as well on YouTube, but I've watched the one or two. I've watched this debate she had with this Shockley, this racist guy Shockley, who was saying
Yeah,
that
it's Stanford.
the
ISIS
Stanford
papers,
guy.
right?
Huh?
The ISIS papers author. That you're talking about?
Yes, the
yeah.
ISIS papers. I came across the ISIS papers, and they were ripping. People might in the chat might know who this lady is. A behemoth of our history and propagating our history and our culture. Now, they crucify this woman, and they're still crucifying her today, even though she's dead, because you can check her Wikipedia entry. And despite the work she did in her life for Black history and stuff like that, she's half of her page is talking about how she propagates this pseudo scientific thing of Black people melanin have Black people having latent superpowers or something to do with our melanin or something,
Which is
now
nonsense.
well there's actual studies about melanin that's been done, like neutral studies about melanin that's been done to show that it's got amazing qualities. Okay, we won't go too deep into that, but I found it interesting that this woman, they've just crucified her because of that theory, almost kind of over eager, you know the thing that this culture does, where it's very eager to shout, to play the whole white martyr thing. So just that the mention of that theory, she was just crucified kind of for like reverse racism. What you trying to say? Black people are special. Is this not Black supremacy? But it's like, cut the woman some slack. Let's say you come to this from a neutral point. For goodness sake, this is the level. I've seen people in the chat say this all evening. This is the level. It's almost, I don't care. It's retarded. It's retarded, the level of detail we have to go into to defend stuff that clearly belongs within the confines of Black history. It's just stupid. Now, I don't know any other group of people who have to go to this extent to claim back and claw back history for people that looks like them.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not all saying we were all descended from the pharaohs, but they looked like us. Okay, I don't know any other group that has to do. We don't have to do this with ancient Greece. So for someone to say, do you know what? This is so ridiculous. There has to be something about melanin. There has to be something about me and my people that look like me, that you will go to this level to deny me what's rightfully mine, and are still doing it till today. And she comes to the conclusion, well, the melanin must be super. It must be super. But instead of actually look at what's drawn somebody to that level, this woman was having to defend the humanity of her people, like in an academic space, against William Shockley. William Shockley, he did I've got a friend, an elderly friend, whose PhD he supervised. And he was telling me about William Shockley. He said he didn't like him as a person, but he respected his intellectual, prowess. This is someone with a brain, a very, very clever individual who Frances Welsing had to defend the humanity of her own people against, who was coming out saying things like, it's clear that you are intellectually, mentally, cognitively inferior. And yet she's the person who's in the docks today posthumously, because she came to a very logical conclusion for somebody that had to do the work she had to do. The fact that we're having to claw this with tooth and nail, it's absolutely infuriating. Sorry, that is a rant. That's a rant.
No, it's not at all. But I think that at the end of the day, like I've done a live stream, well, a couple of live streams about melanin, and it's not my main subject, so I don't. But at the same time, why should we, like you said, why should we shy away from it? At the end of the day, you know, people are always shouting out for science, science, science until the science doesn't, you know, till the science doesn't agree with their sensibilities, then the science becomes pseudoscience. But I'm sorry, it's not pseudoscientific to point out the fact that melanin has a lot of properties, a lot of benefits. You know, in fact, what's pseudoscientific is black people being scared to explore those properties for the sake of offending other people's sensibilities, which I don't agree with. At the end of the day, if you know, if melanin does lots of things and it does kind of look like a superpower, because respectfully, I live in the UK, and when they were propagating that false notion that certain people have better survivability from a certain pandemic that spread, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
When they were propagating that false, oh my God, they were trumpeting that from every single news outlet, every single news source. Oh, you lot need to get tested. Oh, you're weak, you're inferior, you're this, that. And that wasn't even true. Yes. But then when we find out about the many properties of melanin, one that's definitely not even refutable because it's been supported by almost like multiple, like dozens of studies, is that melanin means that you're definitely less susceptible to damage from radiation, and that's across the UV spectrum. You know, where, you know, that's a massive benefit. Okay, so that's a massive benefit. Why should we hold that back? You know, melanin has the ability to convert, you know, UV radiation into different forms of energy and minerals within the body. That's scientific fact. We shouldn't have to shy away from that for the sake of offending people who are melanin deficient. You know, it's just a part of science, and we're just exploring it. I'm not gloating about it. You know, I'm not gloating about the fact that I never wear SPF and I just roll out of the house and I didn't go to any country I like and just be stripped by the sun. That's just the benefit. Okay.
I mean, it's the thing that the thing that the other side don't like to explore is that nobody kind of was talking about this, so you guys made it a thing. Nobody was talking about it, so you guys wrote books about how you were superior for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, so if you started this and people now want to explore it, and it finds out that it turns out that actually the finger's pointing back at you, it's like, don't blame us for it, you know.
Exactly.
It's
Can't
incredible.
put out. So we're supposed to, you know, lambast ourselves and be apologetic for things that they've ascribed to our race that don't belong to, you know, black people, don't belong to black culture. But we're supposed to apologize every time they decide to, you know, shine a torch on some of the ills of our society. But then we're supposed to also, at the same breath, deny any benefit that coming from this culture or coming from this kind of like biological subset of humanity. It's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. That's me personally. I'm happy to explore all areas of blackness, even the parts that upset them.
Yeah, and I think that even with respect to that, because, you know, you'd have a lot of people who try to say that Francis Cress Welsing and John Henry Clark and, you know, Leonard Jeffries, you know, Ivan Van Sertima, these are pseudosciences. These prove that, you know, Africana studies is invalid. But they don't mention, you know, Watson and Crick having racist pseudoscientific views, and just the many different European scholars who saw Africans in a negative light. They respect the fathers of their different fields, whether it's chemistry, mathematics, genetics, right? And they're allowed to put them in context, even though they had harmful views. So we should be allowed to build upon the work of our scholars and refine them and contextualize them for our Black experience today. And as you said, it's like, don't have any fear when it comes to affirming the integrity and the greatness of our melanin and our Black skin and of our culture, because every other race and every other community is allowed to do it. We should be able to too.
I'm looking at the first things that you see when you Google Francis Welsing versus William Shockley. Google William Shockley's Wikipedia page. The first two lines: William Bradford Shockley, American solid state physicist and inventor. Blah blah blah. Now, if you click on the Wikipedia article, I'm sure that it will at some point, I mean, I'm hoping it will at some point get to the fact that he espoused racist IQ degenerate views. But Francis Wilson, first two lines. Francis Llewellyn Cress Wilson was an American psychiatrist and well-known proponent of the pseudo-scientific melanin. This woman.
Why is it pseudoscientific?
But that's the thing. That's the thing. Her stuff, her negative is there in the second line. This other William Shockley guy, you have to go all the way down to find out about his racist views. Francis Welsing, though, hers is there at the forefront. You know that most people wouldn't even click the thing. They think, oh, of course, you know. And that goes to what you were saying just now, Tamji, about how if these people, if such and such a person can have their racialist ideas contextualized, clearly racist and antagonist ideas contextualized, okay, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as we English like to say, you know.
I mean, we've got museums and monuments to Petrie. You know, he's the father. He's the father of Western Egyptology at the end of the day. He's literally the father. They haven't dethroned him. He still has that. And the guy was literally an ardent racist, a religious fanatic. And he tried to, you know, create theories of a dynastic white race. Was it? He was dynastic race theory, wasn't he? Dynastic white race. You know what I mean? So it's like, come on. These are the people that they still, you know, they still reference, and you know, they refuse to blacklist. You know, it came up the other day when I was having this the debate with the Egyptian guy on my channel the other day, and you know, it was talking about using you know, you can't quote a racist. And we're like, well, let's discard all Egyptology then, mate. It was respectfully, like, are you serious? You know what I mean? Because nothing Dark said was any more extreme than any other Egyptologist of his time. You know,
literally all of linguistics, as a field.
Exactly.
The whole 9 yards. Yeah. So I want to get through this because I'm gonna have to hop off. You know,
good. Please do.
So obviously, dental morphology. You know, they had less than half of the traits of the Astutis traits, and they cherry picked features to say that, according to the dental morphology, Neurat was Eurasian. Obviously, a fraud, 100% fraud. That's not the case at all, right? So, these basal Eurasian sources could have been, you know, gene flow, ancestral North African gene flow, you know, rather than Levantine back migration. And the peer reviewers even mentioned that the F4 tests that they use are highly sensitive to outgroup selection, like Modaman being an outgroup, total fraud, right? So an expanded data set would give you a better analysis of that. And to the chart to the top left, you can kind of see how ancestral North African would have shaped what we call basal Eurasian, and would have been an ancestor to modern Africans, especially if you look at the Saharan cultures and the general conventional model that they migrated south after the warming of the Sahara, right? So this is a big piece, no Neanderthal. Whereas modern Egyptian Coptic people and modern Egyptian Arabs, of all the populations on the African continent, have the most Neanderthal, right? And Neanderthal is used to mark Eurasian ancestry. So if Neurat is a Mesopotamian, why no Neanderthal? that's a very,
that's a mic drop.
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts. Because a legit peer review, right, would have said, hey, if this is Eurasian, you should have at least 2 to 4% Neanderthal, but not even a single mention, because they found it and it said 0, so they wanted to keep that out.
Wow.
Vanessa Davies, she's who I mentioned before. She's a Egyptologist and nubiologist, and she looks at studies like Schunemann et al. And Neurat, and she calls it the invading pharaonic race theory, the genetic version of that theory. And they're basically rehashing Petrie model, you know, old Hemidicist models, and trying to fit it into population genetics to promote their racist framework. But Vanessa Davies says that we should use a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach in different fields, not just genetics, in order to have balance, because there's a lot of colonial undercurrents driving such narratives, and we should be aware of the attempts by population geneticists to lie to us. And that's very, very important. This is me, I did my own PCA. And again, this doesn't, consider the S&P ascertainment bias. This basically takes things as they are. And I had AI, run these different data sets of ancient African ancestry. And you can clearly see within this table, you see dynastic Egypt on the chart to the left. I don't know if the people in the audience can see, but what it's showing here is that Nurat man sits square in the middle in between the ancient Ibero-Mauritian or Tafarat on one end, and then the Great Lakes region on the other end. So it would be a middle point in between the Great Lakes region, with Modaman tilted more towards the Great Lakes, and the Ibero-Mauritians with Takakori tilted more towards the Ibero-Mauritian. So this is clear African population, and you can see the labels on the bottom from North African to Kerma to the East African foragers like Modaman to the Great Lakes foragers like Hora, Kalemba, etc. Right. So this is an example of if you considered, these other African populations, and this is a closer look of it right here. So you can see dynastic Egypt right there would be Nurat, right? Kerma, Moda, all the way to the Great Lakes region up here. Then it goes up to Takakori in Libya, and then Tafarat in Morocco right there. And then you have the Shumlaka foragers who are more distant, and then some of the Ballito Bay South African foragers who are more distant over here, right? And then the y-axis would be the east to west to Central African continuum, and then the x-axis would be the super-Saharan to infra-Saharan continuum right there. Right. And then obviously the third intermediate period data, they try to hide this, but the peer reviewers actually flagged it, and they had to admit that their third intermediate period data was from the Schunemann et al. Study, right? And they completely ignored, Dr. Keita and McDonald's attempt to clear this up and remove this from the data set, because the populations of the Schunemann study, we know who they were. They were foreigners. They were not locals, right? They were immigrants. And, this is just an example of a QPADM model of that within the that third intermediate period population, where you have the Levant and then you have the Moroccan Neolithic. So there would be a split using QPADM of those people. And then QPADM, we already spoke about some of the flaws with QPADM, and the fact that they use two-source model to force, Levantine affinities, right? That's obviously flawed. And then F statistics, we spoke about how they're sensitive to outgroup proxies. So Modaman as an outgroup, considerably skews the results in a bad direction. And then this is the last part that I think is both these last two slides. The fact that the initial coverage was 0.226, which is low coverage. That was Merez Jacobs' 223 abstract. And she used coverage amplification to get a more refined. So coverage basically defines how clear the genetic data is to the model. A low coverage data would be lack of clarity. High coverage data would be high clarity. And this is the core. This is a preliminary step into the genetic analysis. This is a precedent that you have to set when you go into the genetic analysis, right? So they amplified the coverage using dental-based amplification. So they used the dental traits or the dental DNA as a way to amplify the coverage, right? Now, over half of the Astutis traits were missing. And this is from the good friend, Joel Irish. And I say that facetiously. He's actually a really, in my opinion, in the opinion of many people, a bad actor with respect to this space, right?
I agree.
Right. So, but a lot of the traits, more than half of the traits were missing, right? So there was only a minority of dental morphological characters that they had retained to carry the population signals, right? And this collapses the feature space and forces it into Eurasian affinity. And when it comes to the specific methodology that they used for dental-based amplification, right? They reported 11 libraries, but they provided no PCR duplicate rates, which is something that you need in this amplification type analysis. No complexity curves, no coverage plots, damage, which we know that there was damage from the dental morphology, and no contamination estimates. Also, no merging shotgun or capture data. And for those who don't know, within amplification or within the amplification of coverage, you have to make it clear, like these different elements have to be described. Otherwise, it makes it unclear if the extra reads reflect new molecules or resequence fragments, right? And there's allele-based frequency biases and certain fine scale inferences that you have to determine, because if you have a 0.22 low coverage and you amplify it, that could just be a replication, that could be contamination, that may not actually be a more fine scaled look into the DNA itself. So this is kind of getting into the weeds, but when it comes to the fundamentals of how they got the DNA, they're incredibly flawed. So just with respect to that alone, it's enough to throw the paper out. But even with respect to all the other stuff that we talked about, I mean, the fact that, I mean, you know, dolichocephalic, tropical body proportions, dark to black skin, I mean, that's enough. Honestly, like that's we don't need any more information than that. And that concludes this presentation. So I can go ahead and take that off. And, you know, those of y'all who are, you know, if you want more of this information, you know, everybody on the screen right now is a really, really good source, you know, so subscribe and support our channels. It's a labor of love in many instances. It's not easy, but we do it because we love the information and we want to provide you with the truth.
Amen.
So appreciate everybody for listening, and appreciate you, Trill, for having me on, and you, King, for, you know, coming on and helping us out.
Thank you,
I appreciate the invite, man. Thank you, guys. I've missed
thank
doing live, so
Yeah,
Oh no,
we miss having you.
We miss you. I'm gonna let you go, Kamji. Stay on, King. I just want to ask you a few things. Thank you so much,
All right,
Kamji.
Sean.
It's
Yep.
been a blessing. Thanks, man.
take care, brother. Thanks, Kamji.
Yo, where have you been?
Are we live still? Or have we locked off?
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay, well, I got to continue talking
Where have
professional
you
then. I was about to slip into hood mode there, man.
No, I wasn't trying to catch you out. Sorry about that.
Gotta be careful with you, man. No, I just got back from Kemet. About
Oh wow.
yeah,
my
yeah. I was there for a week, so I got back about. I say just got back. I got back about 2 weeks ago now. But I went
wow.
there for a week. But I've been suffering with a cold since I got back, so I haven't managed to do much. But yeah, I went to Egypt, so that was great to tick that off. I've obviously got a lot of stuff that I need to present to everybody, which I'm looking forward to share. But yeah, that's where I've been.
Wow, that's I'm envious, man. That's amazing.
Where
That's
have
gonna
you
be
been?
we're gonna have oh, you're gonna I can't wait for you to cook on all of that, man. I really can't wait for you to cook on all of that.
Yeah,
Where have I been? Where have I been? Oh, I've been everywhere, man. Just one more time, just before I even go on, Kamji, that was amazing. Thank you so much. People are in the chat saying thank you, Kamji. Yeah, that was amazing. I'm not gonna pretend like towards the end there I wasn't confused. I was a bit confused, but I will have the luxury of watching this back for the bits that confused me, because I really want to get on the same level as you guys on this, and really understand for myself, because when you understand something for yourself, it's like there's nothing like it. When you understand the levels to which these men have been lying, there's nothing like it. It's the little I got studying that paper myself. Like I know you talked about it, but I was so happy when I saw you on your live. I think your first or second live on it, talking about I think it was your first live actually. You mentioned the dark to black skin thing.
Mm.
I was like, that's what I was saying. I can't believe he's saying the same thing that I spotted. Because something said to me, dark to black skin. What does that actually mean? Knowing these types, like how they tend to play with assumptions and take advantage of people's assumptions, I thought, no, what does that mean? And I went and looked deep into it, and there was an index, and there's an index that shows and on that index it literally shows dark to black skin was separate in and of itself to just dark skin. This was
Yeah.
as close as you can to being basically this is a black person, because the last thing on the list was then black skin, and the ratio for that, the number for that was basically corresponding to somebody that was literally Lupita. Basically that's it. That's like that level of dark skin. But dark to black skin is where most black people fall. That's where most
Yeah.
Negroid
No, dark to
people
black
fall.
is the last one. Dark to
Oh,
black
is
is
it?
the last. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So dark to
sorry.
black is the last one. So there's 6. Because I did
Wow,
a study. I did I covered before this. I'd already covered it. So people on my channel already knew what it was. 'Cause when we did the Cheddar Man analysis, they obviously used the same model. It's called the High-Risk-Plex model, which basically looks at the genome, looks at these 40 like genes that are specific to basically affecting someone's complexion, the outcome of their complexion. And yeah, as a result of that, it will make a prediction on what someone's complexion is going to fall under. So basically there's 6 categories, and these categories are taken directly from the Fitzpatrick scale, which is a scale anyone could look at. You could just Google it. So basically dark to black is the last one. That's a Fitzpatrick 6. So that's people who are dark skinned black. And then dark skin is people who are deeply brown, basically. So who are black anyway. Do you know what I mean? So that's like your caramel blacks would be your dark skins. And then type 3 and 4, that would be your intermediate. That's where you get your moderate browns, kind of like your, ranging from I would say your dark Middle Easterners to maybe at the lighter end and kind of like your Asians, Chinese. The only people who would cross over into types 5 and 6, which is dark and dark to black, I would say would be Southern Asians, so Southeast Asians, Indians. They can often share complexion with black people, with black Africans, I should say, and maybe obviously Polynesians and stuff like that. But outside of that, that's kind of it, you don't really get anybody else falling into those categories,
And
so if you're talking about, go on.
And they left the detail of that Fitzpatrick scale. They left it just willy-nilly, just dropped it in the footnotes as if it didn't mean anything.
Yeah, no, they didn't even mention that. Yeah, you have to find to get the Fitzpatrick. You have to you have to go into the High-Risk-Plex model and see how they. So the High-Risk-Plex will, and then there's a couple of papers which will tell you how the High-Risk-Plex divides those groups basically, and that's where you'll find that out. But yeah, these papers they'll just plunk it on there, and then, and obviously 99.999% of people just won't ever do the dive like you did to figure out what dark or dark to black actually means,
And this is the thinking. It's like nobody's checking this paper out. Nobody's checking this paper out to see haplogroup N1, this, that. They really, most of us checking out to see, all right, either they're gonna really kibosh the Afrocentrists, or on the other side, they're gonna let's fingers crossed, let's hope there's someone decent out there who actually tells the truth about what these people look like. And the meat of the thing, which is what the man looked like, they're obfuscating with little tricks like this, it's and then they put this black and white picture out as if, oh well, we don't know,
I feel like we really need to push against the sub-Saharan narrative, which these population geneticists are desperately trying to revive. Because actually, this was a term that was pretty much seen as pseudoscientific not too long ago. And I think we've done a good job of kind of like outlawing that term. And I feel like it's really making a really strong resurgence now amongst in the kind of like historical, in the field of history and
Funny you
anthropology.
say that.
People are
Funny
really
you say that
pushing this.
because I noticed that too. I noticed that too. I noticed that it's almost like the minute we started like pushing it against it independently, I'm seeing more and more people. I've not heard it used as much as I have in a long time as I've heard it used in the last year.
Yeah.
I'm just hearing sub-Saharan. It's like, what?
Yeah, and we have to push against it because it's a invalid scientific term. It's a valid geographic term since about the 1980s. It's been a valid geographic term, in that, you know, North Africa has now become a racially colonized place by coastal North Africans. But prior to that, Black people have never been geographically restricted. Once again, I always keep saying this. We've never been geographically restricted by the Sahara. The only people geographically restricted by the Sahara were the invading races who cannot survive the Saharan climate. Black people have had no problem. They cross it all the time. Okay, they cross it when they want to, you know, even to this very day, you know, with very little technology.
Francis Ngannou. Shout out to Francis Ngannou. Didn't he cross it?
Exactly. Black people have got no problem traversing the Sahara, and there are populations who basically spent their entire existence within the Sahara. Shout out to my Taboo people, you know, shout out to my Haratin people, shout out to the Fulani. You know, these are people who have spent a majority of their existence within the Sahara. So the whole idea of sub-Saharan is just an attempt to steal our Saharan history, which is what they're desperately trying to do right now. They're trying to steal Africa's Saharan history. And all those, I love the way you started the live stream with the cave arts showing what actual Neolithic North Africans look like, you know, what Saharan Africans actually depicted themselves like, because I think people need that wake up call. This isn't a part of the earth. This isn't your domain. This isn't Arab domain. These are Africans in a very normal sense of what the word African used to mean, you know, up until you know, Europeans started taking interest in African history. So, you know,
bro, you asked where I've been. I've been working. I've been on all fronts working. I'm trying to get a video out for this week. But I don't want to. I realize with more, well, you know this, obviously, the giant that you are, but with more subscribers, with great power comes great responsibility. I don't just want to put out slop. It was okay when I was just like, you know, in you know, the infancy of this channel, but with the more subscribers I get, I want to make sure I put out good information and good production value. So yeah, I'm working on a video to come out this week, and it's quite a long one, and it's quite esoteric, but I hope people enjoy it. So yeah, just busy. And I'm sure like yourself, I can't wait for this your work to come out, and just even that aside, just for you to get well again and start putting stuff out for us. We miss you, man.
Yeah, I miss it. Well, just like what you said, you know, you can get a bit of analysis paralysis, you know, especially when your audience grows. You don't want to put out slop at the end of the day. Yeah. So I totally concur with that feeling. And just to say, obviously, even with what you're talking about getting your head around the field of genetics and stuff like that, first of all, you're gonna have no problem doing it from obviously the stuff that you do on your channel. Your grasp of certain subjects just is amazing. So I know for a fact, I'm not glazing either. I know for a fact you'll be fine. But the other thing is, I'm going to tell you this right now: the field is pseudo. The entire field is pseudo, so just don't expect too much from it. This is the thing, and there's a lot of people who hang their hat on it, and they really take a lot of pride in being able to quote, "Oh yeah, what it was the SLC 24582 gene, and then the SLC 4582 gene, and then what they do," and they get so much pride about being able to quote, "Oh, the E1B1A that comes from Africa," and it's like, dude, you don't even know what you're talking about.
I see them all the
Respectfully,
time.
yeah, it's like respectfully, you don't even know what
Mm.
you're talking about. You know, you're making all of these claims, even the whole idea of linking a population to a uniparental marker, I find laughable and stupid at the same time, you know, because these populations, didn't know that these markers existed. Yeah. And people have never had any problem crossing the border and finding a wife or, or finding, do you understand what I'm trying to say? People have always crossed. Even if you look at African population as a whole, Africans have very short linkage disequilibrium in comparison to Europeans. And basically what that means is that Europeans have got these long chains of genetics that mirror each other. So, obviously if you're, so I'm not saying they're inbred, but if you're inbred, your parents' genetics are the same. Yeah. So as a result, when your mum and your dad get together, there's very little recombination that takes place, which is why, offspring have deformities, etc. Yeah, because when their genetics recombine, it just produces the same gene. It doesn't split and produce a new gene, which is what will happen if your parents are different. Yeah. Now Europeans have that on a population level. Okay, so basically they got these long chains of genes that don't break down because they've got quite recent ancestry. Now, Africans don't have barely any linkage disequilibrium. Yeah. In other ways, we have very, very short and tiny chains, which means we've just moved constantly. So when you see these studies and they try and say, well, these Africans split from these Africans 70,000 years ago, and there's an East and West split, and this, that, and it's crap. It's a load of baloney. It makes no sense. Because African genetics on an individual level says the exact opposite. It says even we just constantly have mixed with one another on the African continent. And that is a shared trait across all Africans. All Black Africans have that trait. So there's just so much. It's a very pseudo field. People think they know what they're talking about. They have no idea what they're talking about. Like I always like to say, one of the people that I dislike the most in this field, who is Johannes Kraus, who did the Schunemann study, he has a West African paternal marker. Yeah. So he has like deep West African paternal marker. Is Y-DNA.
I couldn't believe that when you said that to me. I couldn't believe it. I had to actually go and double check. I had to find. I think I asked you for the video, and I just laughed for like a 4 or 5 minutes watching him say it. Because the guy in the video that he confesses it to, if you watch the clip, he says it's a German guy. He's almost like he's trolling him. He says, "Sorry, say that again. You've got a Sub-Saharan what?" With a big smirk on his face. And then he's forced to repeat it. But as he's repeating it, he then tries to downplay. He says, "Oh well, you can get this in also Romanian population, so it does not mean." I'm like, bro.
It's all over Europe because blooming Moors were slinging their schlongs all over your ancestors, mate. So you know what I mean, trying to come in here, give us some pseudo history, like with the real history. That's what real history is. So people making these big claims about uniparental markers, I find it laughable.
Remember, we're still live though. Yeah, we're still live though.
Yeah, I know. But it's late. You do realize it's like 20 plus 1. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh my days. Oh, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. And then you ask on the where have I been as well. The world is mad. It's like you're trying to get a video out, and it's like, what is going on out in these streets? This is mental, man. I got lost down the whole C. Kirk rabbit hole. I don't really want to, and the reactions from it. It's just it's crazy. It's crazy, man. And it all
Yeah,
somehow
yeah.
comes back to us. It all somehow comes back and revolves around us. It's like,
It's crazy. I know exactly what you're talking about as well. And this is the thing, I've wanted to do content around that as well, but I'm not sure how to approach it. But I'd like to do content because I'm just like, I feel like some stuff needs to get spoken about.
I'm too scared, bro. I'm too
Yeah.
scared. I
Shout
want
out
to.
London in the chat. Shout out
Yeah, he
London.
says the late show. Defos.
Yeah.
Man, I'm gonna let you go, King.
Thank you, brother.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining me, King. I'm so grateful to you, for just coming in on impromptu like that. You
No
made it.
problem. Thank you for
Definitely.
inviting me, bro. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Cool. It's cool. All right. Everybody, family. It's been lovely. Thank you so much. It's very late over here. Have a blessed week. And I will see you very, very soon. Keep an eye on the channel. There's a video coming out. And make sure, if you're here for the first time, make sure you go over to the King's Monologue channel on YouTube and Camgverse, and make sure you subscribe to their channels. Great stuff on those channels. Blessings, everyone. Peace. See you around, family. Kush to Compton.
Thanks, brother. Peace. Thanks, everyone.